Alright, people, alright. Inna alhamdulillah wa kafah. والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فالسلام الله على القوم people أهلا وسهلا بكم. Alright, to this episode of MindTrap with Mufti. Once again, an awesome lineup for you all today. Let me present to you, damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, the profile picture coming right in front of you of the esteemed guest tonight. Alright, look at that. Look at the style, people. Look at the style. Some may be thinking, is this a Hollywood guest that we brought on? But no, there's none other than Rashad Ali. People, give it up right there. Allahu Akbar. Ahlan wa sahlan. Wassalamu alaikum, Rashad Ali.
Alaikum salam, ahlan beek.
Shukran for taking the time out for being with us tonight. Right, there you are. Right, let me just look at that. Flip. All right. People, you're doing it. Let me just do a quick sound audio check. I don't want Rashad to be sharing his valuable words and nobody can hear them. That would just be a tragedy. I've just got right here.
Standard
People,
day.
Let me just check. Sound check coming through fine. I'm just bringing up the YouTube people right here. All right, look at that fedora. Yep, that's it. The fedora's out, people. I take it you can all hear me. All good. All right, so Rashad is a man that does not need an introduction, people. That's what I can say. Somebody who has researched great depths of intricate Islamic topics and areas that are hidden from many, often to the pain of many. It's but Rashad, tell us a tiny bit about for those of the viewers that may not be too familiar, although I doubt that anybody is not familiar with you, Rashad, but Pirbi, in the words of Ghalib, पूछते हैं वो के गालिब कौन है, like, so just a bit about your background, just for people to know a bit about you.
Yeah, sure. I guess I've spent the last 5 years or so working as the resident senior fellow as a researcher primarily, and guiding research and conducting research on issues around a range of things: disinformation, political misinformation, but also, like you mentioned, Islamic studies primarily. So looking into, I guess, what people see as sometimes thorny issues pertaining to Islam in public discourse. These may range from things like political participation, joining political groupings and parties in Western elections, and, ranging to things like discussions about international treaties and norms and the fiqh of jihad in the modern age, looking at things like blasphemy and the different interpretations that were given and how does that fit into the modern age. We're looking at rulings and fatwa around that, and in relation to things like understanding basic freedom, human rights, and international treaties that respect these things, that how do we engage in those matters, essentially rooting them in the Islamic tradition, and building our understanding of how we should approach those things from within that.
वाह 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 वाह, क्या बात है यार, क्या बात है. So, right, Rashad, not to be confused with Rashad Khalifa. Rashad Khalifa, still deemed by many to be a mu'min. No, I'm just messing. Right, Rashad is, those of you that don't know so much about Rash, I once read a comment about you, Rash, saying, somebody said that this is the greatest fitna for the Western world, Muslim Western world of modern times. It is Rashad. And I thought, Really, Rashad is the. I don't know. Have I overtaken you as the greatest fit now, or is that?
I I was gonna say I think maybe that was a position I held, but I've reluctantly passed that over to you. I mean, I literally now get calls from people in places like Canada and Egypt, even, scholars and teachers of mine who ring me, who'll ask me, look, I'm getting a bit of trouble from people. Do you know Mufti Abu Layth? They say you do. At which point I normally say, look, I'm trying to engage with him and to bring him back to the haqq. You just have to give us a bit of time.
That's the best. I say to people that look, on several occasions I'll invite people onto MindTrap or stuff like this, and some of them will be like, in fact, just this week I was speaking to this particular individual, and you see, the concern is with the individual. Oh, if I come on MindTrap, then people will. Oh my God, they'll kind of like my crowd will be. They'll. I'll get basically boycotted, or people will think I'm with Mufti Abu Layth now. And I said, look, you could just announce that. Don't worry, I'm going on there to give him da'wah.
No, it's true because it's just like, they say even if you go in front of the qadi, the murtad has 3 days. I'm of the view
Allah,
of
Allah,
I'm of
Allah.
Sufyan al-Thawri, which is yustatab abadan, not just 3 days. You should call him back forever.
Allah, the mercy of Allah is has no bounds. Has no bounds. I'm just seeing the
In my defense, I mean, Sidi Iqbal was on with you, so
Allah,
if
Allah,
Sidi
Allah.
Iqbal does it, then
The
I have a hood from
It's just
behind him.
the lighting is flashing quite a bit on your side. Obviously, it's the Noor that's coming down on you, the divine Noor. But I'm just
Struggle.
thinking maybe is it if you just to get your but cool, cool. Hopefully it'll iron itself out. Right, so right, Rashad. All right, let me just check that the people are all right. So I'm just checking.
I haven't logged off.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some of the awesome comments right there. Right, Rash, talk to us, man. What's the situation as somebody who's researching? You said one of your areas of expertise, this whole thing on uh apostasy within Islam. I don't mean that's your area of personal experience. Rashad's like, yeah,
Ah,
I've I've gone through that on many occasions. But I mean, somebody who's researched that, uh, to a great extent. What is going on? I mean, there's a particular post that was recently shared on Facebook as well. Somebody trying to explain, um, in an ideal, saying people, in an ideal Islamic world, it is morally, diyanatan, it is okay to murder someone who apostates from Islam. And this is somebody saying this on social media, isn't it? And this is recent, but this is just an echo. Talk to us about this.
okay, yeah, I think he made a comment saying it's morally justified if you murder someone who insults the messenger, salawatullah alayhi salam. He said it's analogous to, you shouldn't do it, but it's like you shouldn't go through a red light. It's not like it's it's legally it's a bad thing, maybe, but religiously and morally it's perfectly fine. That if somebody insults the messenger, you kill them. It's like killing a scorpion or, going through a red light. It's procedurally problematic, but
Uh,
actually you've done nothing wrong.
I mean, do these people have a? I mean, do they have an audience that listens to them, or are they just, just
So I,
like ranting on to
so I think
themselves?
I had this conversation the other day, and I think there's a few different types of people.
Hmm.
There are some people that they kind of believe in some kind of conflict that's happening in the world, and they believe they're part of this grand conflict narrative. And so they're on the side of truth, and everyone else is on the side of falsehood. This kind of like dualistic worldview.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
because of that worldview, then everything they read from Islam fits into that narrative.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And so for people like that, this fits the way they view the world. And so they make Islam and their own Islamic teachings fit that. So even if what they're saying has a semblance of truth about it, they will twist it to match that.
Yeah.
And so it's like when you see things with this whole discussion, there are people that insult Islam. Of course, there are people that insult Islam. There have always been people that insulted the Prophet salawatullah alayhi salam in his time,
Yeah.
and certainly there always will be. And we know that we find that even in the Quran, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is told it's not God they're rejecting.
Yeah.
It's not you they're belying. It's the message of Islam. And even more so, the Quran addresses the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, "Fasbir ala ma yaqulun." It's a direct command that to have patience with what they say.
Yeah.
And so you have these all the time, and that was the whole point of the stories of the Prophet.
Right, but
كما صبر أولي العزم من الرسل, that have patience like the great messengers of great resolve had patience. And so it's not that there's no truth to some people will do this, but
mm-hmm.
their narrative and their worldview is one of conflict. So everything is viewed through that prism. You get other people that I think have, they're somewhere along, they have various mental health problems, and some of that is easily tapped into. And then you have others that are strongly religiously indoctrinated. They're few, but they are religiously indoctrinated with this type of perception of religion. And so they read scripture in this light. And anything that doesn't agree with that, they'll just park. They have cognitive dissonance.
But tell me, this thing about people, if they leave Islam, they ought to be this concept that they ought to be executed for leaving Islam. This what is called Haddur Ridda. If one reads the Quran, the kind of picture that comes up at you that the Quran illustrates is one very clearly of La ikraha fi din, man sha'a falyu'min, man sha'a falyakfur. It's one of, like, the Quran seems to present Islam with a sense of pride that, look, if you want to be a part of it, be a part of it.
تبين من الغي, the
Exactly.
clarity of truth comes through.
So how can it be that you can see this, I can see this, several people can see this, but are we saying that the scholars of old could not see this?
I mean, there is an element of the way Islamic fiqh is constructed. And so there is a big discussion to be had about, do you look at Islamic teachings through those general principles that make the way you interpret scripture in a way that makes it all make sense and it's congruent, or almost for some it doesn't have to be congruent. In fact, the more incongruent the end teachings are, the more consistent that is to our basic maxims. To the extent they have this in the, so like a good example of this is when you have conflicting evidences and you make tarjih between conflicting evidences, do you make tarjih with what yuwafiq ma al-qawaid, what agrees to the principles, or is tarjih bil khilaf? So for the Shafi'iyya, as an example, as a principle, they would say that tarjih is inclined towards that which brings a new different ruling, rather than what agrees with the general maxim.
Okay. That's the Shafi'i thing on dealing with ikhtilaf, when you've got a khilafi kind of issue.
When you have a text which doesn't seem congruent. So a good example of this is, okay, the Quran says, La ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in religion. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. Whoever wants, let them have faith. Whoever wants, let them disbelieve. You haven't been sent to force them into faith.
Of course.
لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُسَيْطِرٍ. You're not there to guard them. There's all of these verses that repeatedly come. So you could build this as a maxim, like Ibn Ashur does, which is,
And those who are not familiar, the great Maliki legend of the 20th century.
Yes, he has this as one of the principles of the Sharia, is freedom of faith. Hurriyat ad-Din is almost like a maqsad of the Sharia. You find it everywhere. And then you have a number of hadith. So one of them comes in, man baddalu deenahu faqtuluh. Whoever
Yeah.
changes religion, man
The
ghayra deenahu faqtuluh.
Ikramas.
Right. So there's this narration from Ikramah where the incident is apparently presented to Ibn Abbas when Sayyidina Ali
Yeah.
allegedly burns people alive who were worshipping him, and Ibn Abbas says, no, he shouldn't have done that. What he should have done is just merely killed him, because whoever changes his religion, he should. لا تعذب بالنار لأن لا يعذب بالنار إلا رب النار. No one should punish with the fire except the Lord of the fire. And so you have this story, and there are problems obviously with the, let's just say, historic data substantiating Sayyidina Ali burning people, which there isn't any. And so there is a lot of debate about this. And then you have this ruling. So either you understand the ruling as...
There's been a few comments on you just slightly, I think if you could just speak louder for some people, although I can hear you fine, but I've had a few different people saying your voice is not coming out so loud to them. I have tried to increase it here with the settings, by the way, so
I'll
yeah,
try and do that.
Yeah, but sorry, carry on. It is because Rashad has he's been gifted with a soft voice, you see, so that's so it can soften the hearts. Allah, Allah, Allah. He's just implementing the verse, you know, قُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Right, so yep, carry on, sorry.
Which kind of brings back to the whole point that actually, on the other hand, you have other hadith where the people came and apostatized to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you have it in the Muwatta, as mentioned, you know, aqilni an bay'ati, release me of my allegiance to you. And Imam al-Baji, he says this is a man who apostatized in his commentary in the Mantaka. He's saying essentially this man is now apostatized to the Prophet, and then he leaves Medina, and the Prophet says Medina to, you know, Medina is like a stove; it cleanses itself of impurity. And so there are lots of scholars today. Like I was reading Dr. Hatim al-Hajj. He has a book they recently published on Hanbali fiqh called Umdatul Fiqh, and one of the appendices cites this as an example of apostasy, and he says, look, this shows that even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed off from punishing apostates.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really get that in the lifetime of the Prophet, do you? I mean, are they relying on anything clear from? I know they're going to, there's the hadith about, there's the weak and non, you know, based hadith that are not really established hadith about Asma, and then they use hadith about Ka'b ibn Ashraf and things like this to state, but there's nothing clear about people who are in the Prophet's presence rejecting, let's say, Islam or insulting the Prophet, let's say, because there's many people insulting the Prophet, where he's saying, oh, such and such deserves to be killed because he's insulted me, or and in fact, when you think about the munafiqeen of Medina, you know, you're going to see that not only was the Prophet aware of them, the Quran even quotes them for what the hatred and the things they're saying about the Prophet, you know, that when we get back to Medina, we will remove, you know, such and such from dhal, you know, in a despised, despicable way. We will expel him from Medina, and so on and so forth. Yet the Prophet is even trying to pray the Salatul Janaza to some extent.
Yeah. So you have almost a number of things. I think that's one. But the other example you do have, and this is in, you know, Imam Bukhari collects it in his Sahih, that, you know, the people who are not Muslim and they come, they're Jewish and they insult the Prophet. Famously, they say, Salam alaik. You know, they curse him and they say, death to you. And the Prophet, and Aisha is there and she gets upset. And she says, wa alayka as-salam, and some narrations say, wa alayka as-salam wa la'na, you know, upon you, and then curse. And the Prophet ﷺ stops her and he says, Ya Aisha, inna Allah rafiq wa yuhibbu rifq wa yati li rafiq ma la yati li ghayri. Allah is Rafiq, He's gentle, He's kind, He gives to the gentle and the kind way, He doesn't give to anyone else. And in another narration, He says, Qul alayk, it's sufficient that you just say, yeah, whatever you said to you, that would have been enough. And He doesn't kill these people for insulting Him. And what's amusing is that Imam Bukhari has this, and Badruddin Alayni says that was his madhab, same as Abu Hanifa, that the non-Muslim who insults the Prophet, he isn't punished. There's no had. There may be some kind of discretionary judgment for the judge or for the head of state, but it's not a religious injunction.
Yeah.
And interestingly, Ibn Hajar, when he comments, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he says, actually, this shows ta'lif al-qulub. It's softening the hearts.
Yeah.
The maslaha,
So I mean,
the
what?
public not applying punishment.
So this whole thing of punishing people, because at its very core, it is irrational completely. Because if Islam is inviting people to Islam, which the Quran clearly is, it's asking them to apostate from their way of life. It's encouraging people to leave a view to come to this view. It would be absurd if in and of itself it believed that, oh, but if somebody left my view, they deserve death. Because then it would equally uphold such an action for the opposing view.
So why, maybe the question, if we rephrase it to, why then did some jurists take this position?
Hell yeah. That's the question. Yeah, Rashad, you're doing it. Yeah.
Because I think we can contextualize it to some extent. That what they're talking about is not merely apostasy per se. They see apostasy as being akin to treachery. So you
treason,
find
the treason of the past, yeah.
So you see this connection back. So when they say things like the other traditions of the Prophet regarding this is not just Tariq-ud-Din, not just abandoning the religion, but Tariq-ud-Din, Mufaraq al-Jama'ah. They are causing sedition in society. In another narration, I think it's Sunan Nasa'i, it's Tariq-ud-Din wa muharabat Allah wa Rasul, and they've declared war on God and His Messenger. And so all the narrations that Imam al-Tahawi brings in his collection is he brings all of them to say this is to do with khuruj, is to do with muharaba, is to do with, engaging in warfare, is to do with sedition, is to do with treason, is to do with betrayal.
And that's big. And you see the Hanafis there, like Sarakhsi will quote in his Mabsut and other amongst the Hanafi as well, that hence it doesn't really apply to the women who are not proactively fighting against, because they don't see them as then a threat.
Because in those societies, the only people that would join war against you were men.
Yeah.
And so it was to do with harb, or the harbi.
Exactly.
And the women, if they had apostatized, then they would just go back to being other women who were against your society, but they weren't likely to engage in rebellion and warfare against you.
Yeah.
And so if there was some criminal element to it, then they could be, maybe they were imprisoned. I think for me, the strongest hujjah for this is what is transmitted in the time of Sayyidina Umar, in his khilafah. In his khilafah, you did have some people apostatize, but not only did they apostatize, but they fought and they rebelled. And so some of them were captured and they were killed. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, he makes it very clear and he says, this is wrong. And he's asked, what would you do? And he says, I would have imprisoned the people that physically fought, that they rebelled, and then I would have presented Islam to them. And that's it. And that's authentically transmitted in the Sunan al-Bayhaqi. And interestingly, the narration which says he would do it for 3 days only, that narration is da'if. Because as Sahabi says, it's غير متصل السند. The chain is not connected. The authentic chain is merely not to kill them.
I mean, I find the whole thing so absurd anyway. I mean, it's very clear from the past that this was a political kind of injunction that people were doing, and it wasn't just Muslims. Everybody, Christians, everybody had this. So it was
Can
something.
understand in the context of those jurists that have this view.
Yeah,
And so the late Sheikh Wahba Zuhaili,
of course.
he explains it as if they start making it land bil kufr, then it has a political dimension to it. So they're starting to make it a political issue in your society. Then it has that realm of looking at social, a social dimension that becomes criminal. It's not merely for the individual changing the religion.
Yeah,
And so you have this then, amongst those jurists that look at it in this way. And then you have those that didn't at all consider it to be an issue, like Sufyan al-Thawri, Ibrahim al-Nakhai.
yeah,
Uh, and so you have that from Umar bin al-Khattab and Umar bin Abdul Aziz in the Muhalla. You have it from, many of the early Salaf. And so you have this kind of conceptualized understanding of first is to do with politics and security, is to do with where your allegiances lie. Are you going to become disloyal? And these things aren't relevant and pertinent to today. We're not in societies which actually loyalty and fealty are to do with your citizenship and your sense of belonging to that state. And this is how a lot of the ulama wrote about this. The late great Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Mahmoud Shaltut,
mhm,
it was to do, because for him it was very, very obvious in his Islam, Aqidah wa Sharia, that actually apostasy was related to rebellion and military engagement. It wasn't merely related to you're changing your individual belief, which is why, again, to go back to the Shafi'i, Imam al-Haramain al-Jawaini, he doesn't place it in Kitab al-Hudud. He places it in Ta'zir.
right. And ta'zir, for those that ain't familiar, is the kind of the judicial liberty that a judge has to punish something that he sees fit. It could just be, well, somebody's disturbing the peace. I know I'm going to give him this kind of a punishment. It's their own ijtihad, basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think this kind of puts that political context to it. And this is the same, I think, with things like, okay, what's the problem with insulting the Prophet, salawatullah alaihi wasallam, is that it is also essentially critiquing the foundations of your society, not intellectually, but in a way that incites hatred.
Mhm.
And so that's the kind of distinction.
Do you think, though, um, the somebody said, okay, was having a discussion with someone, and they said to me that the vast majority of Muslims, according to certain studies, certain polls, a vast majority of the Muslims worldwide, they claimed. Although I really, I'm skeptical about some of these kind of polls and things that are conducted just by the wording that is adopted. But still, they said that the vast majority of Muslims believe all apostates should be executed. Do you feel this is an accurate representation of the sentiments of Muslims generally?
I mean, I think just my view on it would be I don't think that's what most Muslims are animated by.
Yeah,
So it's not what you see them calling for and asking for when they have the ability to freely express their views.
yeah,
If you look at it as an example of this, look at countries like Syria, where there has been a massive uprising, and that massive uprising wasn't to enforce apostasy killing. It was for the basic right to select our own leader, economic rights, and political rights.
mm,
Hundreds of thousands of people were slaughtered there and killed there, literally 700,000 people by the regime. 10 million people have been dispersed. And so they're not calling for um, had the Ridda. That's
yeah.
not their agenda. Their agenda is their basic rights. So even when they are being pushed for it, I don't think that's the issue.
Plus,
Second,
I feel that in some of these kind of studies that are conducted, I don't think we can really call them studies, but these kind of polls that are conducted, often it's the wording
can
and
I
the.
phrase the question for you?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
If I say, do you think we should follow the rule of God, or should we abandon it and allow apostates to be allow apostates to live? How else is a Muslim going to answer that question in principle?
Yeah,
If
I mean, this is my point about the wording. Like, people will say in these polls, would you prefer the rule of God and Sharia, or would you prefer the rule of modern societies? Now, people think they are obligated to obviously always have a loyalty to God. But if you ask them, what does Sharia mean? And don't mention, exclude hudud, 5 hudud or whatever it is. Tell me, what is Sharia? Nobody actually would know what to say. Like, they wouldn't know what the hell Sharia is. Like, what is Sharia? So there's a huge kind of I feel that these things are incredibly misleading. The way, and even the choices that are given. So would a person who, so for example, when they ask about blasphemy, I said to this person, this discussion was with Haris Sultan, by the way. So I said to Haris Sultan, look, I said that I feel if they were to ask the same question to these Muslims, like let's say in Pakistan or different places, instead of saying, if somebody rejects Islam, should he be punished and so on, if they framed it like this, because people sometimes get insecure and they think, oh my God, yeah, punish them. If they ask them, if a person wasn't sure of his faith in Islam, he wasn't sure that Islam is true, is it okay to force them to be Muslim? It's the same question, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, if you frame it in that way using the word force, I said, I guarantee you most Muslims would never accept that. They would say that that's not okay to force them to be Muslim. Would you agree with what I'm saying?
No, I think it is to do with how you word the question, and what kind of emotions do you bring into the person when you're asking that question, because you're framing it for them. So if you frame it as,
you're priming them in psychology, like.
And so good research questions will have a number of, they'll ask the same question different ways in the same research in order to make sure that you're not forcing an alignment by their answers. So if you're making a poll and you do this, you'll ask the same question in different ways to ensure that you're not forcing one answer on the person.
Right, yeah.
And this is what you see with a lot of these studies and surveys. So most of the time in Pakistan, as an example, when they're asked, most people will say, of course, if you say, should we as a country be Islamic and follow Islam, 70-80% will say yes.
Yeah.
If you ask them, should we as a country be democratic, again, 70 to 80% will say yes.
Or if you worded that to say, should the country, the rulings of the country or the laws or whatever of the country reflect the wishes of a small few or reflect the wishes of the inhabitants of the country by and large, they will say the democratic one.
Agreed.
You see, it's just like the words sometimes to them are loaded terms. Like they've been taught democracy, like some people have been taught democracy is an evil word. So they don't know, so they'll think, oh, no, I don't want. It's like people are taught secular is an evil word.
So a good example is this, is in Urdu, what's the word for secularism?
Okay.
What do they say?
Generally, like what, dunyawi, or is that
They say la dini.
Oh, la dini, okay.
And so that just means no religion.
That would be, yeah, that. You see, what's
Whereas
interesting though, in India,
I was about to say, if you compare that to India or Bangladesh,
yeah,
it's Ganatantra.
it's what?
Ganatantra, which means religious neutrality.
Yeah, because in India they celebrate the word secular. They pride themselves on the secular constitution of India. And you've got great, like the scholars of Deoband and Breli saying that, yes, this is a secular country. We're so proud of it. And in Pakistan, they're like, secular, oh my God, secular means like, yeah, I suppose to them, of the world, you see, one is like dunyawi, but one, they're seeing it as a contrast to deen.
Right. So what do you mean by the term? It's what are the assumptions that go with it? And so with this type of stuff, again, I was having this discussion recently there's a good book called by Farhat Tabassum on the Deobandi ulama struggle for a secular India. And it's about, when you're looking at some of the writings of people like Sayyid Hussein Ahmed al-Madani,
Yeah,
and he,
in his
Islam,
pop.
yeah, Islam والقومية متحدة.
Yeah, قومية
Islam,
متحدة, that's it.
Islam and composite nationalism.
Yeah.
And his whole point is that he says the word ummah is used in different ways. So one, in all of the people that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sent to are his ummah. Either ummatul dawa, ummatul mustajaba, people that have accepted the call or people that are receiving the call. Or the term ummah is used to mean his followers who have accepted the call specifically as Muslims. And then the word ummah is used sometimes to mean a group. لا تزال من أمتي أمة قائمة بأمر الله. There'll always be some of my ummah that are upon the truth. And then he says, also, it was used to mean the Madinis, Muslims and Jews, because in the Mithaq of Medina, they were ummatun wahida, baqi and sa'ir al-ummah. They were one ummah, separate from all other ummahs. So here, the ummah concept is a nation of people of different religions, different backgrounds, who are brought together. And this is why Imam Malik radiallahu anh, and you see this in, I forget the name of the work, but it's one of the Andalusi scholars that has this whole discussion that on the one hand, the Jews of Medina were part of Medinan society. They didn't pay jizya because they weren't from outside the Muslim community. And therefore, there wasn't this issue of, are they people that we need to rule over because we don't know if they're loyal to us or not?
Yeah.
Because
And there's a fascinating discussion on the whole jizya thing that, it's interesting that jizya, the word only appears once in the Quran. حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. The interesting thing is that the fact that it was never explained in the Quran, Allah doesn't explain what jizya is very clear that this already existed.
Yeah.
It was something that they all knew what they were talking about. It's like if somebody today uses a particular word, let's say in the UK, if somebody was to speak about, I don't know, a particular, let's say universal credit, or they were to use a particular term, they don't explain it, it's because the people, the audience, know what you're talking about. It's not like
in Arab society.
Yeah, it's a common understanding. Yeah. So this jizya thing was already something that the ancient Arabs had. It wasn't something, it was about certain agreements, about obviously when there's rival kind of factions and when there's settlements and truce, they pay, there was compensation. It wasn't something that Islam had introduced, because there seems to be this concept that Islam introduced this new tax, kufr tax. This kind of, this is the kind of thing that people assume, isn't it? That حتى يعطوا الجزية عن يد وهم صاغرون. They think that, jizya was introduced by the Prophet.
Yeah, and I think the point is the description that follows, وهم صاغرون, meaning that they're quelled, i.e. there's no rebellious faction now fighting against you. Because this comes down to your conception of jihad again. If you pick up the Muqaddimah of Ibn Rushd al-Jad, and his discussion of jihad, he says, yes, there's an obligation of jihad, but that obligation, it falls once you have secured your frontiers.
Hence, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, he in his Arida says that for the Amir or the Muslim Caliph, whoever they are, to expand their frontiers by, let's say, doing a jihad, an offensive jihad, is something that falls under potential istihbab. He calls it like mustahab. It's not, he doesn't even say it's sunnah, he doesn't say it's an obligation. He says it's something that it's mustahab that they can do to expand the frontiers of the Muslim lands. It's not like something which people today would assume is actually an obligation. Oh my God, why are we not out there spreading Islam? And yeah.
Right. And so again, and you build on this and you think, well, hold on, historically speaking, the jurists have this. And this is my point about cognitive dissonance, that people who have been told that Islam is an imperial religion which must conquer the entire globe, and jihad is the means to do that, when they read the fiqh and it says the opposite, they'll just park it. And so they will literally just ignore that which doesn't agree with their ideological view. So here there's a problem. I remember having this, when you look at Shafi'i texts, like Fathul Jawad, and this is the official Shafi'i madhab fatwa. Imam al-Haythami, he explains that, if you have Muslims living in a country where they're safe, and it's not a Muslim majority country, it's just a country which is governed mainly by non-Muslims, but Muslims can live and practice their religion. If that country is attacked, the nearest Muslim army is obligated to go and defend them. Because it doesn't matter that you don't govern this place. They have given freedom of religion to those people.
Yeah.
And so that is a completely different way of thinking about conduct of warfare. Hold on, what do you mean? You're going out to defend a non-Muslim country?
Yeah.
It's not an us and them.
What?
It's a nuanced
Why the insecurity amongst certain Muslims? Why is there an obsession? I feel that there's an obsession sometimes for people to highlight these issues, like saying, oh, the apostasy issue or the other issue. Why? Yeah.
So I think there's two different reasons, I think. One is what we're kind of picking up on is this kind of reaction that we don't want to become completely liberalized. We don't want to be people that abandon our religion. We don't want to be people that have got no connection back to our heritage. Ergo, there's a reactionary sentiment.
Right.
So you have to protect. And in a desire to protect, that means just we're going to be the opposite. So going back to that post that we were talking about earlier, at the end of that post about anyone that insults the Prophet, you should go and murder them. And it says, oh, but some liberals will disagree. So they're trying to pose it as if,
like, and by liberal he means God. With the verse of the Quran, La ikrah fi din. But khair.
Well, anyone that doesn't want to murder people, this is his criteria. Literally, if you don't want to murder someone for insulting the messenger, you are a liberal who's sold out. So there's a reactionary sentiment there. And the question is, why does that exist? Because of a fear of losing faith.
Is it not an... You see, I see it as an insecurity, a reaction to...
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And I think the other reason for that is because globally speaking, Muslims are in a state of general insecurity.
Yeah.
Whether you see things like, it's a good example of this is why people are so animated by anything that happens in the Palestinian cause, anything that happens in Kashmir. Look, the lockdown of the Hindu nationalist government on the Kashmiris. The persecution of the Uyghurs, what they call Uyghurs, the Uyghur community in China.
Okay.
Millions of sterilization. There's all sorts of things happening, and there's a sense of powerlessness.
Yeah.
So when it comes to your Muslim identity, you suddenly feel disempowered. And so you need to somehow assert yourself. And that need comes in this kind of, anything that's Western is bad. Anything that sounds like it agrees with Western ideas is bad. And so we're going to give this fatwa in the opposite way. We're going to make statements in the opposite way. So the fact is, even whoever it was, whatever kind of notion of punishment in the past, it was always, as Qadi Iyad mentioned, in Thabat, and Khafaji comments, he says, Bishahada wal ikrar inda al-Qadi. It's to do with no punishment is applied until you establish the crime in front of a judge with testimony and witnesses and evidences. It's not just for you and me to go around doing so.
Of course not.
They all have these
qawaid
of fiqh. And suddenly all of this has gone out of the window. All of this, jurisprudence that people study for years. The Shafi'i has a maxim that anything to do with the public interest, the maslaha, manuta maslaha, is for the imam, is for the head of state.
Yeah.
It's not just for random people to go around enforcing or implying. And these are points of aqidah.
And isn't this, you see, this ties in with the kind of, I don't know if I can use the term decentralization of Islam, but the point that Islam has become powerless and there are no truly speaking, effective agencies like leaders or stuff like that in the world, that thereby every other person feels they have the right to assume that kind of virtual role of thinking, well, Well, of course, I'm kind of the representative of Islam, and I I too have a voice of Islam, and
I, I think there's probably two or three things all in there. So the first thing is we don't have a clergy.
Mm.
There are people that want to make themselves into a clergy, but
Yeah,
we don't have
yeah, we have an unfortunate
we,
case of a clergy, a tragic case.
you're right. I should say formally in Islam, it doesn't
Oh
have a
yes,
clergy.
by that, yeah. So Islam is not meant to have.
We're not supposed to have that. And then we are more like in the Jewish community, it's a scholarly tradition. So people are accepted based upon their learning and the other scholars accepting them. And so it becomes like a peer review. And you have this kind of a process where intellectually speaking, they're recognized for their contributions and so on. And so you enter a scholarly community and then you can disagree and debate and argue as much as you want. And so that's the other side of it. And when you feel disempowered, there is a feeling of, well, anybody can assert themselves. There's no leadership, and therefore there's a vacuum. So in that vacuum, anybody will fill it. So now all you have to do in order to sound like you are a scholar is grow a beard, speak a bit of Arabic, be able to recite from the Quran, and Hadith, and even better if you went to a madrasa.
Of course.
And you but you don't really need to do that. You just need to be charismatic. And if you are charismatic and you can quote passages of scripture, then you can be a fundamentalist. That's why you've got people like, all these dais.
Yeah.
People that, as the Arabs say, don't know their elbow from their wrist. Yeah.
Elbow from something else, more like, but yeah.
The middle from the risk, they don't have a clue.
Yeah.
And so these are people that fill that void. So you're talking about, I don't want to mention names, but you're talking about people that go out and debate other people because they're trying to stand up in the intellectual vacuum. In the political vacuum, they want to stand up and stand for the rights of Muslims and Islam. But the absence of that kind of intellectual heritage makes them completely unsuitable, either in terms of da'wah or in terms of politics or in terms of fiqh. So you have this, it's, they say, في عالم الأعور, في عالم الأعمى إن الأعور هو الملك, the world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
The Dajjal is king. The Dajjal with a small d or a big D is still king. Right, so that's a quote from Yasser Qadhi. I quote it often on my Monday nights. You probably, just for the reference purpose, you're probably thinking, what on earth is Mufti on about? So, yeah. Now, equally another issue that is quoted so often, and I'm trying to figure out the, obviously I have my theories, the obsession. One is this apostasy. One is this, the age of Aisha is, people are so obsessed in these debating circles to hammer out that she was just a child. What on earth do you think is going on in their head, apart from some severe, mental health issues? What else is going on?
So I think there's an interesting phenomenon a few weeks ago. There was a Netflix TV show.
Okay.
And on the front of the TV show, I forget the name of the show, they had some really, really young girls dressed up really, really provocatively.
Right, I saw a post about this. There was a Facebook post or something.
So Netflix came out and apologized because the film isn't glorifying that. The film is condemning that, or the TV show is condemning that.
Ah, right. Okay,
apparently, said. But the point was the cover aroused enough conflict about this. And there was a young lady who's on Twitter, and she's quite well known. I won't mention her name, but she's quite well known. And
you can mention names on this show. This show is like no holds barred. It's all.
So she went. Look, a few weeks ago, you guys were arguing if they're like 8 years old, they're ready to marry, and now you're saying look at these pedophiles on Netflix.
That's it. Somebody's put it's called the cuties.
Right, the cuties.
Yeah, I did. I saw a post about it condemning it, saying what the hell. And I must say they had a photograph of the whatever the cover, and I did think, what the hell is this? And they were saying what has Netflix got up to, and we need to.
Yeah, it's awful.
Yeah.
The picture is awful, and I think. But the point this girl was making was, hold on a second. A few weeks ago, you're defending marrying a girl who's 9, and now you're condemning this as paedophilia. Make up your mind.
Is this girl a Muslim, non-Muslim?
Yeah, she's Muslim. She's Muslim, and she's making the point to these. What she sees is like, okay, look, you guys, you need to sort this out. You need to get with the program. Where do you stand? And I think there is a point there that there is some, again, I think is this defensiveness that people can't critically examine things without thinking, are you abandoning the Sunnah? So if you to ask this question, okay, how many hadith are there about the age of Aisha?
Yeah.
They all come from Aisha, so the khabar ahad, let's be straight. Some of them come as Aisha said this, some of them come as Urwa bin Hisham is narrating that, such and such is saying this about Aisha.
The hadith.
So there's ittirab in the matan.
Absolutely.
Then the number it mentions, is it 6, 7, 9?
And the 7 and 9, by the way, were probably orthographic kind of, because in Arabic, without the dots, the saba and the tisa would be the same. It would look the same. Now,
so the point is that even by traditional hadith standards, there's ittirab.
Huge. In fact, if you put them all out, I've actually got a chart with all these riwayat put out. Yeah. Now,
so the question, in normal circumstance, you would just say, something, we have this khabar wahid narration, single narration. There's conflicts about, is it a statement of Aisha or not?
Yeah.
There's conflict about the number that's mentioned. There's no way of working out which is the sound of you because they're all just muttarab.
Yeah.
You just say this is da'if, park it. Because that's the ruling on the hadith, which is muttarib, is that you don't pass judgment with it.
Of course not. And that's the madhab of Imam Malik, really, because Imam Malik himself saying this one-on-one will destroy the deen, these isolated narrations.
So the question becomes, why are you going to make that the hill you're going to die on?
So what is it in your perspective? Why the stubbornness on this issue?
So again, I think it's the same thing. It's a psychology of defensiveness and the psychology of defensiveness, of not knowing how to kind of approach things in a critical manner.
You see, I felt it may be this what I called a kind of reactionary bravado effect. That you've got, so for example, somebody tries to cuss you for something, so as a reaction you try to own it, and then you try to arrogantly own it by justifying, well, God said we can do it, so haha.
Which is what you're getting with all of these posts. What's your problem? So there's one of these people that literally says that to somebody, why do you have a problem with it? And I remember saying this to a friend of mine. I said, look, you have a daughter. She's 7 or 8 years old. How would you feel if somebody came to you and asked for her hand in marriage? What would you do to that person?
Yeah.
Would you let that person back in your house?
Exactly. I mean that.
And he was like, no, I wouldn't. And I was like, okay, so maybe approach this with a bit more skepticism. Because, it's just obvious there's a problem here. And I think this is where if you step back, the point about reactionaryism and so on is that lack of confidence.
Yeah.
And to go back again with, you'll just be branded again as, are you trying to change the religion?
No, and more than that, you're trying to suck up to the West.
Right.
Here you are defending the honor of the Prophet. And the kind of counter allegation is, oh, you're doing this somehow to appease the West in saying, no, Islam is okay. Islam doesn't actually say you can have sex with children. And you're like, well, I don't want to swear, but you're going to say, well, of course Islam doesn't say that. I mean, why? That doesn't make it. Of course, I mean, that is the ruling of Islam. So,
right.
But this common thing that, no, just own it. it's it's a bit like how uh, what was it, Jonathan Brown, when he said his thing that he said, I would really love for this not to be true, but it's true. It's like the Prophet married a 6-year-old, and you think, man, this guy, what on earth is he on about? I would really love this not to be true. Cha cha cha. That's a historian, is it? That's somebody academic. These are khabru ahad, by the way, all of which at the lower level are transmitted only by Iraqis. That in and of itself is a clear illah. So first of all, somebody who is, oblivious to that, okay, that's clearly shows the ilm al-hadith. But the point is, how can you state something as a fact anyway, as an academic? Just because it's written somewhere, you can't be kind of stating, and it's not just about that. Many people stating this as a fact that, it is, it was just like this. And you think, well, no, but it wasn't though.
So I think that the point is that why, if you do step back and you think, so I wrote this piece on hadith and reason recently about what is the role of rationality and reason in hadith criticism.
Sure.
And the whole point I tried to demonstrate was this isn't something to do with only the Hanafiya.
No, of course not.
And the Hanafi. Why don't you step back and look at what the Maliki, the Shafi, and the Hanbali authorities have said in them?
They've interestingly, all of them, right back from Khatib al-Baghdadi, even whether you're going to look at Ibn Hazm, whether you're going to look at Ibn al-Jawzi, whether you're going to look at all of these people are writing, if it goes against reason, if it says something about the Prophet in this way, if it has even Ibn al-Jawzi saying even rakakatul lafz, if there's something with the wording, if there's like such as these are clearly baseless hadith. They write this.
Yeah. So the thing was, Ibn Taymiyyah has this whole criteria.
You see, but then the question is this, Rash. The question that people ask that, okay, they have this in the Usul Hadith books, Suyuti quotes it, all these, the golden principles that I quote are from their bloody Usul Hadith books. I haven't made them up, Lam yubayin al-ma'qul, lam yukhalif al-manqul, wa lam yunaqid al-usul, doesn't go against reason, doesn't clash against the established Quran and the mutawatir stuff, and it doesn't uproot an Islamic principle. This is from these people. But the question then people ask me is that, okay, if they wrote this, why didn't they clearly reject these hadith? This is the... What are your thoughts on
that? So again, I think there's an issue with, and this happens in academia all the time, by the way, in every single discipline.
People asking once again, I know you the voice is at its greatest, but they're asking if it can slightly be elevated for those who Allah has not blessed with, as with sensitive hearing.
So I'll try and speak closer to the mic.
Is that the mic? All right, excellent. Yeah, you do that.
So I think one of the things is you'll find this in every field of academia. So in every field of academia, the rigorous academic will put forward a criteria on how to measure what they themselves are doing.
Okay.
The scientist will put forward, this is how you should judge my work. So Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah is a good example of this.
Okay.
The Muqaddimah lays out a set of foundational principles on how to judge history.
Yeah.
And so he's telling you, look, when you have far-fetched stories, as an example, those stories aren't true.
Yeah.
When you have people that are sectarianly biased, narrating things like, so if, for example, they're all people of Tashayyu, and they all suddenly narrate hadith about the Mahdi, maybe you should be critical of that and question it, because they all believe in that sectarian view. And the Muhaddithin have this as an example.
That's Ibn Khaldun very clearly on that whole point, especially the Mahdi point, mentioning that this seems to have just clearly crept in through Shia Islam. But yeah, carry on, sorry.
But if you look at his own history, there are loads of things you'd criticize and say, something, that description of this mystical island sounds like utter nonsense.
Yeah.
And you know this because you've put this criteria down. Now, it's a little bit of a criticism on him, but also it's it's also praising him because he's giving you a criteria to evaluate what he says. So he's giving you a methodology to assess him. And scientists do this all the time. They give you a methodology and you apply that methodology to them and the conclusions that they are drawing. So the way to view this, I think, is look at the early mutakaddimin of hadith, if you like. They're very, very stringent. Then you have the middle period, the mutawassitun, and they are suddenly quite lax. So to give an example, Ahmed bin Hanbal is asked about, there's a hadith which says you should say Bismillah whenever you make wudu.
Right, yeah.
You know, whoever doesn't, falaysa minna, is not one of us, or, you know,
and he declares it weak, doesn't he?
He says every single riwayah of the hadith is da'if. Every single one. Yet, two things happen. He says, even though it's weak, it's sufficient to give you a ruling. You should try and do it. But if you forget, it doesn't matter. It's still valid. But if you deliberately omit it, then your wudu is not valid. But he says the hadith are all weak. You know, this is, by the time you get to Imam Suyuti, this hadith is placed in his book of Mutawatir Hadith.
I mean, is there something that Suyuti will not put in his Mutawatir Hadith? I mean, I don't know.
It gets worse. There are worse examples, not with Suyuti. I think it's Qattani's book, which is even worse.
Oh, yeah.
So you have, the narration, أَطْلِبُ الْعِلْمَ وَلَوْ فِي السِّينِ. Seek knowledge even if it's in China. And Hafiz ibn Abdul Bar, he says, look, this is basically more or less made up. Shuayb al-Nawat says it's mawdu, it's fabricated. But there are so many chains of it. There's so many chains of it.
Yeah.
So it's da'if jiddan, it's exceptionally weak. But Qattani puts it in his hadith mutawatir. Because there's so many chains.
Yeah.
You have this decline from the mutakaddimin, they're very, very strict about it. The mutawassitun suddenly become quite lax. So again, the other example that's really, really well known is Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's. All the hadith are weak about the satanic verses. They're all da'if. But يقوي بعضهم على بعض.
يقوي بعضهم بعضا. And he's like, well, they're okay.
Hassan.
Yeah, he says, Hassan. You think, acha. Just threw the Prophet under the bus. But he goes, whatever happens, we can't lose the tools, the apparatus.
But now let's go back. The principle in Aqidah is the isma of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet is infallible in delivering the Quran, because otherwise the whole Quran could be wrong. So the idea that he's going to be influenced by Satan to recite the Quran in a different way, it kind of conflicts with A, that concept of Isma, and B, the whole Quran itself.
I feel that even without going into the concept of Isma, it, just from a reason perspective, it just goes to show that it makes no sense. Like the whole clash of the Prophet with the whole struggle of his life in prophethood was him standing for Tawheed. Otherwise, the Arabs didn't have a problem with just Allah. They had a problem with him denouncing the other deities. So if the Prophet in one point is going to be like, no, I'm going to stand firm, I'm against this, they're attacking him, I'm going to stand firm, and then a one-off, okay, yeah, today we'll have all these gods, but back to this mission the next day. It does not make any rational sense that this would have...
Well, it's incredulous.
Exactly.
Any human being would do that, let alone a prophet of God.
Yeah, I mean, of course, but
and that's the point.
Actually, I was arguing from not even the religious theological viewpoint. I was just arguing from, you could retrodictively, just like by looking at history, you could analyze that. It's like, so for example, imagine.
But that's the point we're getting at, which is the muhaddithin lay these criteria down, the mutakallimin lay these criteria down.
Yeah.
So you can hold them to the standard that they lay down. And then you can show them why, oh, hold on a second, they are falling from this quite far. And so the same thing with a lot of this stuff, that you can just turn around and demonstrate. You've laid down a set of first principles. Let's keep those first principles and let's find the ones who agree with those first principles in the most congruent manner. And you'll always find some ulama who did this. There'll always be some, from within the tradition, that it's like the whole discussion that we were having earlier about, is there a had for apostasy? Is there a had for insulting the messenger? Like Abu Hanifa's madhab was obviously there isn't a had for these things. And so you have this, very, very clearly laid out. It's like, again, for example, when you look at, the Ash'ari spectrum of doctrinal matters, is there such a thing as miracles, that karamat al-awliya, that break the laws of nature? Yes, some people said they were, but Imam al-Isfaraini, the great, was very, very clear there wasn't. The great Maliki Imam,
Ibn Abi Zayd?
who came...
Oh, no.
No, the Ibn Battal.
Oh, right. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Ibn Battal in his Sharh Sahih Bukhari, he says, no, if it's khariq al-adat, if it's breaking natural laws, these are just fanciful stories. They cannot happen.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, he's also citing Ibn Abi Sufra saying that as well. Yeah.
Right. So you have this. This is like the great Maliki Ash'ari tradition. Sunni, Ahl Sunnah, whatever.
I do believe that Ibn Abi Zayd said that as well, and the only problem was that the backlash was that strong. I feel that he kind of stepped. It was a battle he didn't really want, I feel.
And you find that what they tend to do then is they moderate it slightly because they're afraid. So by the time of Subki, he's like, well, they can do some things, but they can't do other things that are better than the prophets. So it's kind of like, so you see this kind of like but the point is, within the intellectual tradition and within the culture of the Turath, if you like, you have these views. It's like today. I remember we did a radio show about 10 years ago and we had a discussion about magic.
Okay.
And Abu Hanifa's view, famously as cited by Mazari and so on, Abu Hanifa was magic didn't have a haqiqa in the sense it was changing things
more
in
illusory.
reality. Is more illusions. And we know that for a fact now.
Of course.
Because you can substantiate that, you can put people in laboratory conditions, ask them to replicate them, and it is impossible. There's no doubt about that. And that is one of the sources of knowledge that we have in our books of usul.
Ibn Ashur has a very fascinating discussion on that, summing it up into saying, well, this is simply what people were referring to was things like either trickery or hypnosis, or maybe kind of potion effect, like mood stabilizers, certain things that, maybe hallucinogens and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact is, you can see there are certain things that exist within the realms of the normal laws. And so this is how it's understood by Ibn Hazm, it's how it's understood by Abu Hanifa, it's how it's understood by Fakhruddin al-Razi. And these are all major figures of, if you like, I don't want to use the word, but orthodoxy. These are people whose aqidah is not
that which I am a clear representative of. I am.
If you just repeat after me, Ashhadu.
This will be the greatest show ever if Rashad comes on and then he's brought me back to Islam. Is that what the... But,
with all of these
Rashad, this thing though, this thing of hadith, don't you think that that what I call the third wave muhaddithin, especially the likes of Ibn Hajar, al-Iraqi, and Ibn Salah, and these people, I feel that by that time, you see, it is, and even earlier, even part of the second wave muhaddithin, but I feel that this is, it's like, you see, they are too invested in this, it is a profession by that stage. It is something which, it isn't it's not so much, it's not at all about the matan anymore, about what the hadith is carrying. The kind of vocation of isnad has become a career for people.
So I think that happens, but I think So if you look at the early definition of when people, so when the early Huffaz, when they use the language like, oh, this hadith is munkar,
Hmm.
they just mean it's strange.
Yeah.
We've not heard this.
Mm.
Ahmed ibn Hanbali says things like just avoid all gharaib, all narrations where there's literally a single narrator, when it goes back to one, that's not ilm. Just be careful of that. So
Yeah.
it's the early times you have this type of just, there's a bit more rigor because they don't want to attribute to the messenger that which is not from him. So the attitude is the opposite of, oh, I want, because now we have the, oh, I would, ihtiyat means to be careful of not following what the messenger said. Whereas in the early period, ihtiyat was, do not attribute to the messenger what he didn't say.
You see, there's that what you're saying, Rash, and I also feel that you see the early Islam, the early era of Islam, institutionalization hadn't kicked in properly. There wasn't this like I know you said that there ought not be a clergy, but the clergy hadn't fully formed. There wasn't these things weren't fully there yet. So you see in early Islamic literature, there's many things like beginning with Imam Malik rejecting hadith clearly right in his book to Imam Ahmad saying things like whoever claims a consensus is a liar, to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal also saying on hadith that there's things like the maghazi and the fitan and the ashrat, these things that there's la asla laha, these things, and tafsir, sorry, and the ashrat, that la asla laha, that these things are just generally baseless hadith. This whole thing changes later on with the real institutionalization of the deen. I mean, nobody thinks like that anymore.
So I think you do get some, I think this is why it comes through like, there are people that come and revive some of these things through history at
Mm,
different periods. So I'm probably not as anti, the muhaddithin as maybe or the third wave of muhaddithin as you are in that sense, because I think you have they come as a reaction to certain things.
mm,
And so what you're getting is a reaction to um, abandoning of the hadith tradition. So you
mm.
have this thing where great ulama, they really are, they're really amazing works of fiqh.
Of course, of course,
And then you read a hadith in it, and you know just from reading it, that's a fabrication.
of course, yeah.
Pick it up and you think. So the question becomes, how did we get to a stage where great fuqaha include these narrations in their texts? And it is a question, it's a reasonable assertion. And so what they're trying to do, they're trying to make sure that we need to sift through and be careful of those types of things. And the emphasis for that then becomes isnad.
Yeah, but then they're saying things
Second
like,
side is that Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani himself, he is someone that avoids content rejection because I think he sees that as somebody else's job.
but he's saying, like, you've got him following on from Ibn Salah, are saying the Sahihain are maqtu'un bihima. Yeah, they are qat'i. They hold the same position of power as the Quran. Um, this is not something that the early muhaddithin clearly whether somebody can say, well, I infer that from what they're saying, but they never weren't explicit to say things like this. They never pushed a dogmatic doctrine like this.
So if you compare that with Shafi and his Risala,
Yeah.
Shafi's Risala divides hadith into two types, the khabar am and the khabar khas.
Mhm.
The general hadith, ajtama alayhi al-ummah, everyone knows it, everyone agrees on it. He means tawatur, he means that which is really, really
Yeah.
well established. He doesn't mention hadith, he mentions practices that are well known. There are 5 daily prayers, the prohibition of zina, these types
Yeah.
of things that are very, very well known.
Yeah. I
And then
refer
you
to this as the living tradition of Islam that is carried through by fiqh and stuff like that.
right.
Yeah.
So he said, this is obvious. And then you have khabar khas, and he said these are things that يمكن فيه الغلط, it's possible to make mistakes. أو يحتاج التأويل, requires some type of interpretation. Now Shafi is very, very clear about this. Later on Imam Nawawi is very, very clear. And he says the Jumhur of the Muhaqqiqeen have said that khabar ahad or dhanni, the single narrations are not definitive sources of information. I mean, the question's obvious. if you're a human being, can you make a mistake? Yes. If you're a really smart human being, can you make a mistake? Yes. Okay. You're never going to be infallible. So a single narration or a group of people is not definitive knowledge.
I mean, let's just, for people who are
That
not too familiar,
yeah.
just to give you an example, this is what they are saying in essence. Imagine somebody was to speak, I don't know, okay, I'll take myself as an example. Somebody's to say, I said something, yeah? But this is 50 years from today. And all it is just one guy hears it from one guy who hears it from me. That's it. Like, there's no, even though there's so many people around me, nobody else has heard this. One person from one person. This is what we're talking about, Khabru Ahad. I mean, in and of itself, Khabru Ahad sounds absurd to be a source of confident trust. Confident trust. I don't mean as to add to your resources, but to be a source of certainty. It's absurd.
So the thing is, so somewhere down the line, like you said, Ibn Salah, he concludes that everybody's looked at Bukhari and Muslim so much, and they've agreed that it's Sahih, that it has some kind of the Ummah's general
طلقته الأمة بالقبول.
So tulka bil ummah bil qubul. And that notion then becomes, oh, it adds to it. So the khabar had this in Bukhari and Muslim.
Yeah.
And so what Ibn Hajar does, he says, well, if they both have it, muttafaqun alayh, then, you know, we can be sure it's certain. Now, this is developed in this manner that's really extreme. If you compare that to like the actual Salaf, where, you know, like you mentioned, Imam Malik says, Nafi told me from Ibn Umar that al-bay'an bil khiyar ma lam yatafarraka, that two people have the choice to, you know, give up a contract as long as they're still in the same place.
Yeah.
You know, they moved away. Imam Malik says, nah.
I mean, he transmits it and says, yeah, thanks, but we don't know.
We don't know that.
Not really.
The point here, why? Because he's saying, because that would undo every single contract in the universe. By that, you can just undo any contract.
I mean, it wouldn't necessarily undo, but it could. It just gives, it empowers
empowers someone to do that.
It really empowers the customer more so than the seller, I guess.
Yeah, but the point is, it undoes contractual obligations. And so either you make a ta'wil like Imam Tahawi, which is to say, it's talking about the contractual session, where you're still negotiating. As long as you're still negotiating.
Because they say, لم يتفرقا بالأقوال لا بالأبدان.
Right. But that's a reasonable kind of joining together. It's kind of like he's brought it together in a way. And so, but Malik is just saying, look, you know, this is single narration.
And yeah.
And so the thing here is that, and it may not be just one-on-one, fine, you know, that's the caricature of the lowest level. But why are you saying this is definitive knowledge? How are you getting to that stage? And this is where, generally speaking, you know, they will usually say, well, there must be some other evidence. Or there must be some very, very strong consensus around this. And obviously there's no such thing as a consensus.
Consensus is a very fascinating word, since nobody has, there is no consensus on what on earth consensus means. I mean, because this consensus also emerges with this institutionalization. You know, this whole thing, it's something that wields power for the clergy. You know, there's consensus in it. If you go against consensus, you are now a kafir. That is the fear factor.
So I think there's so I think the people that kind of really question this in the usulis as well was that, well, it's, first of all, it's not just mere consensus. It's got to be consensus around. So Imam Juwayni, he makes the same point you made. He says, you know, someone can reject ijma and not be a kafir. So how can they be called a kafir for rejecting an ijma? They can reject the entire concept of consensus, and they're not unbelievers. So how can they be non-believers for rejecting, a particular consensus? So Imam al-Haramaini says this is batil qat'an. He says this is definitely wrong.
Because the
And so,
weird thing is that how can there be something like this that the Prophet himself has not really spoken of, that the Quran has not guided us to. Now, people could say we can infer from this particular verse, who doesn't follow Sabil al Mu'mineen, or we can infer from here, we can infer from there. But that's not like if it was something that was a matter of Iman wa Kufr, the Quran would be clear, you
right.
know. Yeah.
So I think this is why what they do say is it's not to do with the ijma in and of itself. It's when you go to what's daruri, it's necessarily known. Meaning you stop a random guy on the street and you ask him about Islam. He will tell you, yeah, we pray 5 times a day. We don't
But
drink
you
wine.
see, but the irony is that's not what they mean, because when you see those things are established bin nas, like they're established by the Quran and the
So what?
living tradition.
So they say. So what they only say is, well, when I say they, some
Yeah,
the muhakkikun amongst them, like Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, Imam al-Jawaini, they'll say that it's when it's around those issues which are ma'lum min ad-din bid-darura.
yeah,
So Ibn Ashur, when he's commenting on this, he says, he basically says what you said, the living tradition of Islam is so well known from not one text, but multiple texts. And it's not to do with the rejection of a specific turuk. It's this concept that everybody knows. We believe in God, we believe in revelation, we believe in a hereafter,
yeah,
we believe in 5 daily prayers, we fast the month of Ramadan. Everybody knows these things. And it's
yeah.
that which makes it inherently ma'lum min ad-din daruratan.
But why would you need ijma for that if it's already known?
Well, he's specifying what type of consensus is definitive, and I
Hmm.
think that's a way of trying to. So he does this in his his own commentary on Qarafi's Tanqih.
Okay.
He-
Hmm.
He's trying to specify and
Who,
restrict how it's applied, so it doesn't get misapplied by people.
who are we speaking of?
Ibn Ashur,
Ibn Ashur, of course, in his Tanqih. Right now,
and I think
yeah,
coming back to our kind of thread,
yeah,
if you like, these become appropriate concepts by which to then reassert and reassess where we're going as a religious community or where our scholarship is going. So you can just reassert these things. People like today, in terms of hadith, is interesting as Dr. Hatim al-Oni.
okay, yeah.
So he's kind of like, we need to go back to the mutaqaddimin, their stricter approach, and reanalyze the assertions that are made.
But I
So,
mean, even people like Sheikh Dr. Hatim al-Auni, are they like he is definitely somebody I like. I see him much more open-minded than you would envisage somebody like from Saudi or something like this. But would he truly be able to critique like the tradition that, because is he not still reined in so much? Because I've read something about him and Bukhari and stuff like this, and once again, that kind of dogmatic defense of trying to say that, oh, you're not allowed to question certain things that have been transmitted, and this is just fitna, and this is just towing that same line.
I mean, I think I think the way best to put it is he's a critical thinker from within that perspective.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
And
if you
I think
take that kind of Salafi thing, he is definitely, very enlightened by their standards. Incredibly
let's take,
enlightened.
let's take another example of some of the stuff that people say. Again, without mentioning names.
No, no, mention
Uh,
names. It spices it up.
you had this with the recent passing of famous personalities and people who are not Muslim, and people saying, "Oh,
Oh, is
I
this
hope."
the recent Chadwick Boseman thing? No,
Right,
no.
Chadwick Boseman,
Yeah.
and he died, and people were upset because they saw a talent, they saw someone who was standing up for justice, they saw someone that was close to Omar Suleiman as an example in America,
Hmm.
they saw someone standing up for Black lives. There's a lot of things that people saw in him that they thought, oh, this is actually someone that touched people in different ways,
Hmm.
and so it was a normal sentiment to be able to show. I mean, analogous to what the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the companions, you know. when there was a funeral body passed and he told the companion, "Stand."
Sorry, the volume just slightly. I think that might be my private jet flying above.
Your private jet flight. So there was a passing of a funeral, and it was a Jewish man, and he told the companions to stand to show respect. He
Oh, of
didn't
course.
obligate this.
Yeah.
He didn't do it every single time, but he told them on this instance to stand. And someone said, this is a Jewish man, and he said, isn't it a soul?
Yeah. In our nafs. Yeah.
And he's like, oh, hold on a second. So there's a soul that's passed me by, and so there's a certain sort of ihtiram for that soul. So at the very basic level of humanity that the Prophet ﷺ is teaching, and it's in Sahih Bukhari, that this is how we deal with this. You saw people react as though anyone showing empathy, sympathy, respect had violated the teachings of Islam.
Yeah.
And I had this conversation about, well, can you even make dua for them? And I know you addressed it.
Yeah. Which I say you absolutely can.
Well,
By the
this was the
Quran.
thing.
Yeah.
This was the thing that if you pick up some of the the fiqh commentaries,
Yeah.
Qalyubi has a hashia, who's a famous Shafi faqih, has a hashia on Jalaluddin Mahalli's Kanz al-Raghibin.
Okay.
And they talk about the janas, and you find the body and it's not Muslim, do you pray for them? And they say, well, you can't pray for salvation if they were definitively known on kufr and shirk. And Qalyubi explains, but you can obviously pray for their forgiveness. Because
But this.
forgiveness includes lots of things.
But this
And
thing,
then,
you've got, on that note, you've got people like Baydawi saying in his Tawali that, look, if a person does their best, to arrive at the truth, right? Like they felt that was true, and they've obviously lived their life contemplating it, whatever. That yurja afuhu, that this is somebody who
you
that
hope
would
that,
you hope that they have attained salvation.
yeah. I mean, I tell you what's even more fascinating is Ibn Taymiyyah in his
Okay.
Musawwada.
In his what? In
Al-Musawwada. He
Musawwida.
also
Okay.
Ali ibn Taymiyyah, and also in his Majmu'ah there's a discussion about this, and he says the same thing, because he says, okay, what's the Sunni majority position? Is Aqidah is definitive.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody makes a mistake, they're misguided. At the very best, they're misguided.
Yeah.
Then others will say no, they're kafir because it's a definitive matter, and then others will say no, they are forgiven, and then Ibn Taymiyyah says no, they are rewarded for their ijtihad.
Yeah. Okay.
Because all the verses that say things like رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا وَأَخْطَأْنَا,
Yeah.
don't hold us to account if we forget or we make a mistake. Khata is not dhanni, that's ijtihad.
Yeah.
Khata is qat'i. And so you're seeking forgiveness for your khata, which is qat'i. And he says this is why, if they've made ijtihad, then this is what some of, like even Daqiq al-Eid says, he says taklif bima la yutak. You can't expect someone to make ijtihad, arrive at a false view, and then hold them to account for doing their best, because then you're expecting more than they're capable of. And the Quran says that's not possible.
Kamal al-Haytari from the Shia, a very balanced kind of Shi'i, or from what I've heard anyway, the things I've seen of his seems quite balanced. But he had an interesting question which got me thinking. He said that the verses of the Quran, like when Allah says that He created you, Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum, we created you from a single self and made you into shu'uban wa qaba'il ta'arafu, inna aqrabakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. What's that the closest of you of mankind to God is the one of most taqwa? He said, what's to state that non-Muslims don't have taqwa? Because, this taqwa, is this an Islamic thing only? Like, is it exclusive to somebody only having Islam? Because I started thinking about it and I thought, well, no, it's not. Like, why? Because Allah doesn't begin this verse by saying, Ya ayyuhal mu'minun, or, it says, Ya ayyuhan nas, O people, that mankind, we created you like this, so you do this. And the best of you, of mankind, is the closest, sorry, not the best, the closest to God of mankind is the one
Isn't it
that is.
akramakum, isn't it? Those are most noble. Akramakum indallah.
Sorry, yes, of course. In akramakum indallahi atqakum. Now the thing is, this atqakum of having taqwa, we seem to have monopolized this. It's like saying, you see, because what we've done is we've tied it in with the word God and then said only we have access to God truly. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case from God's perspective. Like from our perspective, we might think, oh, only our ibadah is being accepted. But from God's perspective, you've got this question. I mean, it got me thinking, and I thought, well, it's a fair point. Why do we? It's like saying, do only Muslims truly have a monopoly on kindness or on ihsan or on? Is it like on aid or on vigilance or on meditation or on? And if we don't, then what's to say that we only have that we solely have a monopoly on taqwa? Because the taqwa is not actually, I mean, we've given it these translations of saying, oh, taqwa is that, it's praying so much or doing something. This is not the definition of taqwa. I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
I mean, I haven't really thought about that verse in that particular way. I mean, I think there are problems with the way to think about it in that way, just because even if the verse starts off with Ya ayyuhan nas, and it's addressing people, the likelihood of who it's addressing really is the audience that is reading it or being addressed by it, which is going to be the Muslim.
No.
Because
the Arabs were not shu'ub. They were qaba'il.
Right.
And the shu'ub were the Persians and the Byzantines. So the settled community, civilization, were the shu'ub. And Allah says, we made you shu'uban wa qaba'il. And tribal.
I was about just the first part, the kind of Ya ayyuhan nas.
But this goes to show that it was general. Because the Arabs generally, unless you're going to argue the southern Arabs were shu'ub, but they weren't Muslim.
No, I'm saying that the initial address, who it's addressing, if you like.
Okay.
Is
as in the Quran is being revealed to Muslims, you mean like that?
In that sense. And who's going to respond is going to be the people who are going to be reading it. So I don't think that bit, for me anyway, I get the point.
But then that would mean the whole Quran is being revealed to Muslims. And the Quran would never then be addressing non-Muslims by that argument. Because the whole Quran is being revealed to Muslims, I suppose.
So I think when you step back and look at, okay, what is at least purported to be when this verse was revealed, whether it's a sound or not, there's debated because it's sabab al-nuzul, and sabab al-nuzul is a big area of debate.
Yeah, most of it is just made up.
It's made up, or let's just say opinionated.
Opinionated. I like it.
So, it's said that when the Prophet ﷺ had the Fath of Mecca, and Bilal gave the adhan, and some of the pagans and some of the other Arabs and even the early converts were saying, oh, hold on a second, couldn't you find someone better than this? And Abu Sufyan allegedly, he responded to them saying, look, what are you doing? Allah will reveal a verse about you. And then allegedly the verse was revealed then.
Abu Sufyan saying it in defense of Bilal.
Yeah.
Afatu Makkah.
Yeah.
That sounds highly romanticized. Because wasn't he just heavily opposing the Muslims and just about embraces at the Fath? So if he just about embraces and then immediately becomes the pinnacle of humanity, I think that's...
It's not talking about the pinnacle of humanity, it's talking about the nature of faith. Because I think the people like Abu Sufyan, I think they had faith long before embracing Islam.
Faith?
I think they recognize the truth.
Oh, yeah. That's a different issue. Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not dissing Abu Sufyan per se.
But I think what he's doing is he's reacting in a way that shows he fears God. He's saying, oh, hold on a second, guys, you're making these statements, Allah will reveal something. So he's almost like he's intimately familiar with the dynamics.
But that just sounds like one of those things that's made up. I mean, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. I mean, I'm not. Like some people are very critical of Abu Sufyan and stuff. I'm not necessarily, but I'm just saying that story just seems too romantic. Like it just seems like one of these.
I don't think it's romantic. I think it's more the opposite. It's kind of like there's an element of inadvertent recognition of, oh, I've seen this before.
Hmm.
It's more a kind of, this is my experience. You're going to do this. This is going to happen. This
Okay.
is how relations worked in his life. It's kind of like that kind of account. And so that's when it's revealed. So you get the message is about the universality of humanity.
Hmm.
You're not better than anyone. You're not just because he's black or he's half black and half Arab. There's no puritanical race here. Ta'arufu is to know each other, to familiarize each other, to recognize each other.
But why state then شعوبا وقبائل?
Because it is true to say there are many, many different nations and peoples.
Because the general research of historians will show that when the Arabs use these terms, they refer to Sha'ab as settled civilizations that were usually quite large, and things like the Persians or the Southern Kingdoms or the
Like
Byzantines,
nations.
nations, yeah, who
It's
didn't operate on a tribal basis. And then you had Qaba'il like the Arabs who operated tribally. So I feel that part of the verse,
It's saying you have to negate any of these things. None of those things make afdaliyah.
but I feel that thrusts it immediately into the scope for those people being addressed. The
Right.
fact that it says shu'uban, I feel it would be addressing people that are shu'ubi as well.
Sure. But I don't
Yeah.
think that negates what the general concept is, which is that, like you said, is to do with the people that are most kareem, the people that have the most amount of nobility.
Because I feel
But the nobility isn't to do with your tribe. It's not to do with your nasab.
okay.
It's
So
not.
if you just
Really,
take nobility,
yeah.
kareem, you see this karam concept of karam being this kind of like nobility, generosity. These kind of things are intertwined in this meaning. It's nothing to do. It's not the monopoly of Muslims.
Agreed.
It's a human trait, isn't it?
Agreed.
That the kareem, somebody being kareem or doing ikram al-daif and hospitality, and this isn't something exclusive to the faithful. So inna akramakum indallahi atqakum would also, I don't know, it's really got me thinking that I've been looking at certain verses and thinking, actually, the muttaqeen, and even though I've always viewed it as just exclusively Muslim up until
So,
just recently.
okay, so I think the one thing that would support what you're saying um, is who the closest in love of God to the believers in the Quran.
The Nasara, as in,
The Nasara.
yeah, the Christians.
Because amongst them are people who love Allah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So you have this kind of like, there is a connection these people have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Mhm.
I think
Okay, sorry, you were about to share something with us at the time, Rash.
so if you look Surah Bayyinah, it's talking about لم يكن الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب والمشركين منفكين حتى تأتيهم البينة. There's a mafhum al-ghaya that we don't impute kufr on people until they've been given the bayyinah. And the bayyinah is that which makes something clear to that person. It's burhan qati'. It's the clear-cut proof. And Imam Ibn Arafah,
Yeah.
in his tafsir, he explains that there are two kind of views about what is the meaning of kufr. Is it by only by inad, by obstinacy, or is it merely kufr? Is it merely the rejection of the truth, or is it only when they reject the truth by being obstinate in rejecting the truth, meaning they recognize it as truth and then they reject it? So those are the two interpretations.
As in, to have known it to be the truth. That's what you're saying. To have objectively.
And then to reject it. And this seems to be what Imam al-Ghazali is going with. This seems to be what, in Faisal al-Tafriqa, this seems to be what Ibn Arafah says is one of the two views. And this is what you mentioned from the Tawali of Qadi al-Baydawi. This is his kind of perspective. And this is the gem that Imam al-Haramain makes of Ubaydullah al-Anbari's view, which people say He's saying that everyone is on truth, whether their aqaid is batil or not. Musib, كل مجتهد مصيب في
Yeah.
العقليات والفروع. And Imam al-Haramain says that's obviously impossible because some things are just false. But he says maybe what he meant was they're musib in the sense that they've done what they can. They've made ijtihad to the best of their ability. And to hold them to account for anything more is taklif bima la yutaq, is holding them to account for what they don't have the ability to do.
Yeah.
And he tries to reconcile it that way in the Burhan. And so there is the other view, if you like. And if you bring that together with this discussion, then of course, people that don't knowingly reject the truth of Islam, then they're not really upon kufr. And this is that view. And if you bring that in, then you can see those other verses, that's what they are alluding to. And in that kind of context, you can see atqakum are people that have that consciousness. But what I find difficult is the idea that you could describe someone as muttaqi, he has taqwallah, but doesn't believe
You see,
in God.
but the question is that no, is taqwa Allah?
Right. So that I would say I guess is to do with how do you interpret that word? And do you interpret that word in light of other verses of the Quran? Which is, I guess,
because I understand that there is taqwa, and I understand that there is taqwa of Allah, taqwa Allah. I don't think that they are by necessity always bound. So people can, I feel, be muttaqi and not be mu'min, but would we say they are from those muttaqillah, those who are of taqwa of Allah?
But okay, just let's say you accept that. What does taqwa in this context mean then? What is it having consciousness
So
of? Or
I would understand it to mean, in that sense, a conscientiousness, especially in light of this verse, which begins by addressing humanity and speaking. The focus is humanity, not God. So Allah in this verse is focusing on humanity. So I would understand taqwa to mean those who have the greatest conscientiousness or conscientious compassion towards humanity.
I think
That
this sounds ta'wil ba'id, but each to their own.
because in this verse, it seems quite anomalous that Allah begins by speaking, addressing humanity, ya yunnas, telling them, oh, look, listen, your origin is one, trying to draw them together, trying to then speak of diverse civilizations and really you should get to know each other. And then saying that, by the way, the best of you in the sight of God is those who do most ibadah to me. Like it doesn't tie in well as trying to say, well, those who are more conscientious, but conscientious of what? Like, because it's just saying that the best or the most noble to Allah, the most conscientious of you. What are conscientious towards?
Maybe if you look at it as kind of taqwa in that sense of conscientiousness is fair, but it's a kind of a connection of your spiritual and your moral conscientiousness.
Yeah, but morality wouldn't necessarily be. You see, so this is what I meant by compassion. That morality wouldn't be restricted to faith in that sense. Like even people who do not believe in Allah can still be very morally upstanding people.
Absolutely. They can be moral, they can be just. But if they have integrity as a moral feature, and Islam is presented to them as the truth, and they see that, then they would accept it. That's my point. That you can join them to, you can join those verses together in a way that says it is talking about taqwallah in the sense of like God consciousness for the one that is presented God.
But the problem today with this reason of, this thing of saying, well, if Islam is presented to them, Islam is so loaded today with with so
Agreed.
much baggage.
Agreed.
Because it's not, Islam today isn't just about, like, if you look at historians of like people like Fred Donner, other people who are addressing Islam in its early historicity, they say that Muslims in early Islam, from the Prophet's time and the early companions, don't seem to make a clear, visible distinction between them and other fellow Arabs. Like they seem, and hence they call it the believers movement. They're not like trying to be so distinct about we are, by the way, we've got this and we've got, they seem to just be natural people. Hence, John of Damascus as well, and other people saying, we're pretty sure these Muslims are just a new sect of Christians. They think they're just, because they're so natural in the way they acclimate with their cultures. So today,
I agree that in terms of the way that we present Islam today is almost a barrier to
like if you weren't Muslim today and you were brought up as a non-Muslim, it's very unlikely that you would embrace Islam. Like, I'm just being realistic, like from a perspective of realism, because Islam is too loaded. It's like an Eastern thing with so much cultural baggage.
So I think we're having this conversation recently because obviously the anniversary of September the 11th is coming up.
Okay.
And one of the things that happened in the West was prior to September the 11th, Islam was still very much seen as an exotic other.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much demonized. It was still seen as Orientalism was still a fascination with Islam.
Okay.
Yes, there were many of them that misportrayed it. Some of them may have wanted to dislike it. Many of them loved it as a culture and a civilization. Some of them were probably closet Muslims. Some of them were fascinated by the entire thing. But Islam as a culture and a civilization was still quite exotic. Whereas soon as 9/11 happened, it went literally from one spectrum to the other. I'll give you an example of this. The day before, Danish newspapers had an article about Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Okay.
The radical Islamist movement. And they had
the cancer of this ummah.
But the article was saying, in Copenhagen, they went into one of these really nasty areas. They converted all the drug dealers, the leading gangsters, and the kind of crime and drugs just shot down. And so there's this article saying, hold on a second. Look at this group, look at this movement. They've gone into these they've gone into the ghetto and they've had this impact.
Kind of cleaned it up. Yeah.
They've cleaned it up. And then September 11th happened. And the next day they had an article saying, oh, hold on a second. This is radical Islam. And have you heard of Hizb ut-Tahrir? So, and I'm not trying to,
it's because it's an equal role was played by Western media and especially the Bush administration and these things.
So there was a reaction.
Yeah.
And my point is that I'm not denying what you're saying in terms of that. And this is what Imam al-Ghazali says, is that that people are of three types: those that have seen the truth of Islam and rejected it, which are very small; those that don't know about Islam, and these people they should be saved.
Sorry, that's my jet blocking out your. I need to tell my personal pilot to stop taking my jet out every now and then. Yeah, carry on.
And so Hujjat al-Islam says the second group, they don't know anything about Islam. And Allah says, مَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ فِي رَسُولِنَا. We're not going to punish people till we send them a messenger. The verse in Surah Bayina, until we've given them the clear-cut proof. So those people are obviously people who are saved. And then it says the third group, what they've seen of Islam is so off-putting, a sensible person wouldn't want to become Muslim.
Because it's tashweeh surah, isn't it? A suratul mushawwaha lil Islam.
And so that's his argument, that there's a whole group of people. And now bear in mind, he's speaking in the height of Islamic civilization. He's speaking at the time when if you wanted to be educated, you want your kids to be educated, you send them to Muslim lands so they can learn about, kalam, mathematics, ideas. This is what they were doing in that period. This is the height of civilization. Today, we're in the exact opposite of that, where if you are in a Muslim country, you want to become sophisticated and civilized and educated, you're desperate to send your children to Western countries.
Because today, on the pecking order, we're right at the bottom.
Right. So
as Muslims.
it's magnified even more.
Yeah.
Imam Ghazali's point is magnified even more. So I completely get that.
Yeah.
And I think in that, and this is my point about bringing all of those things into context, that I think there is a point about those people that haven't been presented Islam in a way that يلتفت فيه النظر is how they describe it. It invites you towards investigating and finding the truth. If anything,
But don't you
if all
feel
of the-
that there's, you see, I feel that certain Muslims become troubled by hearing that non-Muslims will also attain salvation. Because say that again?
It's not fair. I have to do
Yeah,
all these things.
exactly. Like this,
Right.
that is the same thing I've heard people say to me, that
So,
it's not fair. That why
you know
did
what?
I have to pray and do the, and they got to chill out any?
It's latent. It's latent Mu'tazilism. So the Mu'tazilites had this conception of you're only going to enter Jannah by good deeds outweighing your bad deeds. To the
Yeah,
extent that you do anything bad, you're probably not going to go. We just don't.
yeah,
And so that concept of you earned Jannah, you deserve it.
yeah. The
Whereas
wujub al-aslah from the usul
right.
al-khamsa of the Mu'tazila. Yes,
Whereas
yes.
the Ash'ariyah, and this is my personal favorite transmission of this narration, which has, plenty of narrations to the extent that even other than Suyuti said is mutawatir, was that لا تنجي أحدكم بأعمالكم.
Of
You don't
course
get
not.
salvation by your deeds. إلا رحمة من الله. It's just a mercy from God. And the companions asked, وأنت يا رسول الله? And even you? And he said, even me.
Even me. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that rahmah, salvation is bestowed. You don't deserve paradise. God grants it you.
We've become the abna'ullahi wa ahibba'u.
Right. So,
Which is the irony, because Allah is in that verse of the Quran condemning those Jewish people that was saying, we've got salvation because we've kind of secured it. And Allah's, satirizing this point that, that you got a special contract, have you?
right.
Are you God's special little children?
Well, the whole point is, yes, we believe you have to have iman. Yes, you have to do good, but Islam is a ni'mah. It's to know God is a blessing.
Yeah.
To know that you're not alone in this universe, that everything that happens by the natural laws that are imposed upon it is the divine will. And to know that you can trust in God. Tafawud al-amr ila Allah. He is al-wakil. He's the one that disposes of all affairs.
And there's a fascinating hadith as well.
The most compassionate of all compassionates.
Yeah.
You know,
And
that's fair.
there's a very relevant hadith with the Prophet ﷺ. I believe it's in either, I believe it's maybe in Sahih Muslim actually, but there's a hadith in which the Prophet is giving an example of prior and this ummah, and he's speaking about reward and recompense from Allah. And then about this ummah being one of the last ummahs, and yet its reward being amplified. And he gives the similitude of a person who has certain laborers. They're doing work. And one of them works from Fajr till Dhuhr, and one works from such and such time. And the last one works the least amount of time. And he gives them, he gives the first person such and such reward. And for the final one, he doubles it. And the laborers, the ones for the earlier ones, complain. And they say, but why has he got double? And the person says, in this hadith, he says, have I wronged you or shortchanged you? And they say, no, you haven't. You've given us what we deserved. Like, we asked you for this. And he says, then I can increase for whoever I would like. Is that, surely that's up to me if I choose to show an extra favor to someone. It's not like I haven't wronged you, have I? Like, if I given you less than you deserve or you asked for, then you could take it up with me. But did I not meet my agreement with you? And this, I feel, although many people position this for, the previous ummah and this, but I feel also fits this scenario of Muslims getting ticked off that why do some Muslims, sorry, getting ticked off that why can a non-Muslim attain salvation when he didn't have to do wudu and pray, and he didn't have to fast, or she didn't have to fast Ramadan, or she didn't. It's like, well, this is dhaka fadlullah yu'tihi man yasha. This is not for you
Both
and me.
ways. It's both ways.
Yeah,
It's the fadl in the akhirah,
yeah,
and it's the fadl in the dunya, because when you look at it from the dunyawi perspective, this is Islam as a burden. It's not Islam as a fadl for you. Alhamdulillah la ni'mat al-Islam wa kafa biha ni'mah.
true.
So Imam al-Hizb Abd salam, he's his Qawaid al-Kubra, he discusses some of these things.
That's a very fascinating point. I really like that point. Yeah.
And he emphasizes this. He says, look, fine, if you miss prayer, you have to make it up. It's qada. And he says, but the Zahiris, they said if you missed it deliberately, you can't make it up. And
even if you tried.
Even if you tried. And the point, he says, on this, even if they've got the hukam wrong, their reason is right. Because you've missed the fadl. You've missed the opportunity to speak to your Lord. To have that.
It's so true that, look, this thing of Alhamdulillah ala ni'mat al-Islam wa kafa biha ni'mah. That it is true that today the deen to many people is but a burden that they tolerate. Like, I did this for God. I sacrificed my pleasures and my leisure for God. Like I suffered. This kind of, where really Islam is about enjoying that. It's actually a ni'mah, isn't it? It's actually something which a person should facilitate one's life, not impede it. It should be something which brings that satisfaction and ease to you, because this is what, this is by the definition of what a ni'mah, not a niqmah, not something which is a punishment or burden from God.
Whereas that conception switched it around. So it's like, when Allah says on the Day of Judgment that Ya ayyuhal nafs al-mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan maradiyya, you're happy with God and you're pleased with Him and He's pleased with you. That's it's completely the opposite conception here, because you're blessed with the ability to know God through His divine names.
Yeah. And tying in with that, even, people speak often of that, the mithaq, when Allah takes from the arwah. This thing, alastu, and it's not about ilahikum, alastu bi rabbikum, isn't it? Because that rabt of the Rabb is to do with nurturing. And you've got that am I not the one that took care of you? Alastu bi rabbikum? That this qalu bala. But people often just restrict this to mere creed and theology. Oh, there was an oath about who is the true God, and God is saying that, we acknowledge that the true God is Allah. That's not what the verse is actually saying.
So I think this is the other thing, is theology is to put a frame. Theology is to stop you from messing up.
Or is it to exercise control?
Okay. If you like, theology is kind of like the sound concepts. If you don't have those sound concepts, you're going to mess up.
We mean by theology creed, the aqidah.
Yeah, I mean, what for me, I mean kalam in that sense.
Oh, right, okay. Because kalam is like still philosophizing on religion, but then the aqidah is like, you better believe in these 165 things we're giving you.
So I mean, look, God is not like the creation. ليس كمثله شيء. And the principle of mukhalafat al-hawadith, God is nothing like creation. You can't conceptualize Him any way you conceptualize created things. It doesn't tell you anything of emotional value. It's just a concept to stop you from messing up your creed of God. Similarly, when you say that Allah is ghani, it's a concept. God does not depend on anything.
Yeah.
Ghina is a concept.
Richness, which means richness.
You need God. God doesn't need you. La yaftakir ila shay. God does not depend on anything at all. No time, no space, nothing.
Yeah.
So it's to stop you from messing up and becoming anthropomorphic or, whatever people do, corporealists. When you want to know God in a positive sense, He's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik Al-Quddus, As-Salam Al-Mu'min Al-Muhaymin. He's the one that preserves the believers. He looks after the people. He is the most compassionate. He's the one that sustains you. And this is what you're having a relationship with. So why is God Ash-Shakur?
Exactly.
Shakur is, why is God grateful for creating us and giving us the ability? Yet He's grateful.
Yeah, like and فَإِنَّ
Shakur,
اللَّهَ شَاكِرٌ Ali.
yeah,
You know, Allah is grateful, which is an incredible, you know, it is from the profound connection of Allah with His creation that He describes Himself as being grateful to them.
right.
In a way, innit? That's like,
It blows your mind because you're grateful for someone that's done something for you. That's usually what gratitude is for. Someone does you a ni'mah, a favor, and you're grateful for them. Now, we don't do any an'am upon Allah. We're not doing favors for God. Yet God shows gratitude for what we do. You know, God is sabur, patient. Not just sabir. His sabur is the exceptionally patient.
yeah.
Why? Patience is for us because we're weak. We can't get our own way. So we're patient with things that happen to us or what we can't get. God, fa'alu lima yurid, He could do whatever He wants. Yet He's chosen to be patient with His khalq, with His creation. And this is His name that He's ascribed to Himself. And you start to see the Sharia in this way. Because the Prophet teaches the Sharia through the Asma. You know the ratio with Aisha? He starts by saying, Inna Allah rafiq, yuhibbur rifq. God is kind and gentle. He loves kindness and gentleness. So you should be kind and gentle. So the behavior and the Sharia is a manifestation of the divine names. This is what brings it all together. Your practice of Islam, your love of God is your appreciation of God. All of this comes together. And this is what Qadi al-Bakr ibn al-Arabi's Ahmad al-Aqsa is all about. It's about knowing God, appreciating the divine, and seeing your practice of Islam as taking you closer through that. And that is a blessing.
And even the, you know, from the ostensible perspective, beauty.
Right.
Inna Allah jamilun yuhibbul jamal. Not to kind of dissuade mankind to kind of think, well, we need to become some kind of hermits, or we need to become some kind of, you know, not too bothered with ourselves, or not to. No, that is teaching you, in fact, the opposite. That inna Allah yuhibbu an yara athara ni'mati ala abdi. Allah loves seeing what He has bestowed upon you from His blessings. I mean, of course, that is what He wants to see.
Right. And so this is a completely, you know, if you miss this, then you miss what faith is. And so you have Kalam theology gives you the context, and then learning about the Asma gives you the meaning, and then you learn fiqh again as abstraction.
A soul to the body.
Yeah.
Something that is imperceptible, but yet it is everything. Because the body without it is just, yeah.
And I think this is the thing, that if you break down the sciences of Islam in a way that detaches from this, so you have Mustalah al-Hadith, Usul al-Fiqh, Ilm al-Kalam, Usul, you know, Fiqh and Qawaid, unless you bring back the essence of it through the Asma, through recognizing what religiosity is by taking you close to God, by relating to Him through His names and attributes, the Sharia rulings suddenly have new meaning. Patience, gratitude, you know.
And this is not something reserved for the clergy. This is
everybody.
No, because my point of saying that is there is this understanding that because you use the word religiosity, but religious folk, if I can use that term, are somehow closer to God than your average people. And I've often been opposed to this notion that does not hold true. That people have a personal bond with Allah that, you know, only Allah knows how, you know, intense and how powerful that bond is. Just because a person...
Allah.
Say that again, sorry?
La ya'lam junud Allah. Who knows the soldiers of God?
Exactly. So when you're saying religiosity, you're not just to be clear, that's not Or in case it is, I don't know. You're not referring to just religious folk.
No, no, I mean, essentially, it's having that reflection, that knowledge, that consciousness, that awareness, and that practice of your faith in that way. That's a blessing.
Yeah.
So the fact that you got that in this world is, a huge blessing that other people didn't get.
Mm.
That's why when Allah completes His religion, وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي.
Yeah. Ni'mah. Once again, ni'mah. It is amazing that Islam is often referred to as a ni'mah, and it's completely been spun on its head now. It is a niqmah. It is something that is just a bloody, it's at the very least a burden or a, a kind of a covert calamity.
Right. So when we're making in every single salah, in every single rak'ah, صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم, we're asking God to guide us to the path of those He has placed His blessing. And those were the Nabiyyin, As-Siddiqeen, Ash-Shuhada, Wa-Salihin. There's that whole category. It's not just the Prophet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's Am, isn't it? It's
all of those people that are mentioned, that Allah has blessed. And so that pathway is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
And that's the path of people that recognize the ni'am. And so the other meaning of kufr is kufr al-ni'mah.
Exactly, yeah.
It's to reject the blessings of God. And I think this is probably where, ironically, where we show a lot of that ingratitude and the way we think about it. And that's at the root of a lot of this stuff, I think. It's a personality.
And it's interesting that when Allah addresses in the Quran as well about excessively disbelieving, about we guided them to this هديناهم النجم فإما شاكرا وإما كفورا. It's interesting, isn't it? That kufr and shukr, these are the opposites. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and they're both opposites, and they stand in the place of the pathway of faith and the pathway towards unbelief. Because the whole point is you are ungrateful because you don't recognize God's favors is the pathway to kufr in itself.
It is kufr. Kufr in and of itself really is ingratitude, but it's that an arrogant ingratitude to God after having an acknowledgement, or at least a subconscious acknowledgement of His favors and everything and His reality.
Yeah.
So it is that, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that I think is why, and this is the thing about what people get mixed up with tasawwuf. They see it as some kind of mysticism.
Okay.
In the sense of like it's, there's hidden ideas and mystical beliefs, as opposed to, no, we're talking about suluk, we're talking about how you behave, we're talking about character, we're talking about recognizing God in your life.
But today, just as these other things, tasawwuf, in my perspective, has equally been hijacked. It's just, groups and the same kind of politics, and it doesn't equate to this, realize that, this thing we're talking about, this kind of speaking about, even though I suppose maybe in some theory it does, but in practice.
I think this is the Siraj al-Murideen of Qadi Abu Bakr al-Arabi. It's that type of suluk, it's that type of tasawwuf, it's Ghazali and tasawwuf. Yeah. It's not to do with, getting involved in particular cults or turuq. Not that there's anything wrong with the turuq in and of itself, but it's, it can become cult-like if you miss the essence of it. And I think that's what essentially Islam has become for many people. It's an identity, it's a cult, it's a belonging, it's a special in-group. It's not manifesting the blessings. And I think that's why you're going to get this, to go back to the question of, hold on a second, why do some people have this? How is it it's unfair that God could possibly bless someone to enter Jannah? We have so much of this in our tradition.
Yeah.
So God quite literally grants Jannah to someone for kufr.
Exactly.
So the example of the man who says to his children, when I die, burn my body, separate my ashes.
This is one of my most favorite hadith, because let's just unpack that slightly. The things that he's saying. So first of all, this very conversation, he feels Allah isn't aware of it. Yeah.
Right.
He feels that he
Can trick
he
Allah.
can trick Allah. He feels he can escape Allah's kind of escape Allah, his grasp. He feels
God doesn't have the ability to resurrect him.
exactly because God doesn't have the ability to even track him down now that he's ashes.
And they say there's two things.
And there is
even
no afterlife for him.
right.
It ends with this dunya.
And so there's
And
two things that everybody
and
agrees
just
on.
one
God's
crowning thing there, he also undermines the mercy and compassion of God. Like he limits it because he feels there's no way God could forgive him.
right.
Yeah.
And then Allah says, Fashidini ghafartu lak.
Yeah.
Bear testimony, I've forgiven you.
Exactly.
And it's like, even Taymiyyah brings this is a man who's in kufr, and God is granting him paradise.
Mm.
And it's like, so look, don't, inna rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. You either believe that or you don't, that God's mercy outstrips his anger and his wrath. You either believe that or you don't.
Yeah, وَمَا يَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُم.
Yeah. What does
And this, in shakartum, just be grateful. And it's interesting that shukr is really done often by actions, isn't it? Because, and one of the greatest, because when you're thinking about it, if it's just hamd, then that would be done by just praising, like just saying, oh, thank you, Allah. But really, one of the more, layered meanings of shukr is it's not just hamd, just praising. There's also some kind of an action, some kind of a gratitude. And sometimes the clergy have restricted that to ibadat. Oh, shukr means you're going to pray to nafal. But shukr really, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَشْكُرِ النَّاسِ لَمْ يَشْكُرِ اللَّهِ. That whosoever doesn't express shukr to mankind has not expressed it to Allah.
So, I think this is, again, it's, this is where I think they talk about how you view things. So either you view all the good things that happen to you as things that happen in your life, and you don't see that this is the way Allah has granted you these things through those means. And there's others that will view this and see, this is how Allah has blessed me in my life. So your friends, your family, the things that happen to you, the trials and tribulations you go through, these are opportunities, these are means of blessings, these are things that you can be grateful for. And that's a perspective, that's shukr.
Yeah.
And so so it's not
that's a kind of like a tough version of shukr, isn't it? Like facing up to the difficulties, the challenges, and with time, obviously not there and then, but in time, people do recognize, well, actually, I wouldn't be here today if all of that hadn't happened.
Fact.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I think so. And so in that sense, it's not that praying 2 rak'ah is doing the shukr. It's you pray the 2 rak'ah as shukr almost.
Exactly.
So it's you're incentivized and motivated by it.
And this is how I've explained is the understanding of that verse that وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. This illa is for the aqibah, kind of after this. The lam is for the aqibah. إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ is not here that many people translate this as saying, oh, I've not created them except that they should do this to me. I want them to worship me. This is why I created them. Rather, that I have created them as a consequence. They worship me. Like if a person says that, oh, I did this, like let's say I did all these favors to you, لِتَظْلِمَنِي, like that you oppress me. Not that I did it so you oppress me. I did it, and as a consequence, you do that to me. Here.
So So and I think this is how I think it's narrated from Ibn Abbas.
Yeah. It is. Yes.
Is that before ibadah is ma'rifah.
Yeah.
So you have to know God ontologically prior. And so this kind of brings back the circle of our conversation, that it's only through knowing God and his blessings on you do you then make ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's what comes first. And this, I think, again, to bring it back to kind of like some of the conversations we're having, the theme of the discussion, if you like, the first part of that is intellectually you recognize God's existence.
Yeah.
The second part of that is you're informed of what that means through God's revelation and God's creation.
Sure.
So you're able to recognize the divine within the creation of its manifestation of his names. And then you understand the names as they're presented through that. So you understand what mercy means because you know what a child knows, has that, has a mother's compassion to the child and the baby. Otherwise, mercy is meaningless.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're able to, so you have these kinds of layers, if you
relatability,
like,
this kind of these to relate to God in the not as
right.
as God, but to relate to him, as in like, oh, this otherwise he's just entirely abstract. He's the impersonal God.
Right. And so when you're able to do this, then you have this kind of, your theology makes God transcendent, your spirituality brings him immanent.
Say that again.
So
Say that again.
your theology makes God transcendent. He's not part of the creation. He's not like the creation.
Yeah.
He's not in a time and a place. He is the creator. He's not even in time because he's not. There's no beginning to him. Qadim bila ibtida.
It makes him
He's
just
eternal,
entirely impersonal and just
entirely
abstract.
impersonal. And then his revelation brings him to you. Hatta, أقرب إليك من حبل الوريد, until it's closer to you than your very own heartbeat, to a thing that keeps you alive. هو معكم أينما كنتم. His ma'iyya, his immanence is wherever you are, and wherever there, and that kind of conception of it, it brings those two things together in that unique way. And I think when you have that, this is where the kind of like, if you lose balance between all of the sciences, then you can end up one way. Whereas if you have this balance of kind of, you find you study Aqidah, you study theology, but you practice that, you study fiqh for the way you're going to do your rulings and make sure you don't violate God's shar. You study usul to understand how intellectually you are going to have your foundations. And then your behavior, your suluk, is that which takes you closer to God. And it's having all of that that makes Islam a complete unique package that takes you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through its ulum. Otherwise, the ulum are just means.
The ulum,
but
the sciences that within Islam.
And if they're means that don't go anywhere, then what's the point? That's why people get spiritual burnout.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. That's absolutely, it's overwhelming, but in a very positive way. Yeah. I think if we can take, if you're up to it, maybe some rapid, quick 1-2 questions if people have got some. Do you feel?
Sure.
And I know we've taken up so much of your time as well, Rash, and I know you're not an absolute vampire like me. So, right, if there are any questions, feel free to post them and take a look right here. I've got the Facebook people as well. Their comments coming up. Guys, take care. Oh, that's just a praise, like, oh, Mufti and Rashad shall not perish. Allah, Allah, Allah. Make dua. Allah, Allah, Allah. Khadim Rizvi saying, I'm also a complete unique package. I'm sure you are. Somebody, Maryam has asked, Quran is where Allah tells us who He is, and His creation will confirm that. Sure? I'm not sure. Maryam asking, Mufti, is Rashad your real life friend as opposed to a virtual friend? friend. Yep, Rashad is a real life person, and he's a friend, absolutely. So does
13 years?
Say that again, sorry?
Is it 13 years?
Yeah, is it? Yeah, I've known Rashad for about 13 years now. Wow. So somebody said Al-Ghazali's philosophy of education lies mainly in the knowledge of the glorious creator. Would you agree with that? I'm not sure I understood the question, but I'll leave it to you, Rash. That Al-Ghazali's philosophy of education lies mainly in the knowledge of the glorious Creator. Would you agree?
Uh, I'm not saying it's not true. I just think there's a bit more to it because his conception of education is quite, he actually has a lot to say about tarbiyah,
Mm.
about how do you bring up children, and about
Yeah.
understanding that children, if we are not emotional about this, they're more like animals than they are humans when they're young.
Mm.
So you have to train them.
Of course, I agree with you in what you're saying.
And you train them by making sure they have the right emotions first, not ideas.
Yeah.
So you can't intellectualize them, and then you give them ideas
And
later
and
on.
that's exactly what contemporary Piagetian and other kind of approaches on children and how they develop the qualitative development. It is sensory initially. It's this kind of, and then later the final stage is the whole operational. What is the conceptual abstract stage? Right.
But absolutely, I think one last thing I would say on that is that probably the best work I've ever read in English, if you want one book on this, is
Please.
the translation's a bit clunky, but the book is still phenomenal. Is Ghazali's 99 Names of God,
Okay.
and it's a translation of his Maqsad al-Asna fi Sharh Asma al-Husna.
People, you've got it right there. So people often ask, what books should we read in English? Well, there's a recommendation right there. Somebody asked, where is it gone? Does Allah have an image? Huh? Okay. Well, interesting.
Well, I mean, if it'd be something to think about, is Qadi Iyad has a book, the Ilam
I will
on
be
the
teaching
Qawaid.
the I'lam from this Wednesday in Birmingham, people. So, uh,
And he discusses that exact question in there. So something to look forward to. In the Ash'ari conception, no, God does not have an image, a surah.
yeah, no, of course, God does not have an image like that, but unfortunately, some of our Salafi brethren, they they kind of believe it without saying it, but it's unfortunate. But yeah, is it bad to be bad? By Omar. I don't know what. Bad man. This one, bad man. Right. Do you believe we will meet Allah, Rosalina? Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, of course. But the question is that, you see, I feel, of course, I feel that we will meet Allah, but our concept of it, I feel incredibly falls short. Like it's so, like we're kind of picturing it the way we're picturing it, like we're standing and this being is standing. I just feel that that is our human conceptualization of these things. Yeah. Why is there so much sex in Jannah? Sex and booze and alcohol.
I think the point is it's a place of eternal bliss.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. It's not really that there's so much sex. I feel that the afterlife is. It's not just I feel. The Hadith describes it's la khatara ala bali basharin qat. You can't even conceptualize it. That let alone. So these are just symbolic speech in the Quran to approximate the concept of bliss for certain people, certain readers.
And I'm sure sex in the afterlife will be great as well. I mean, the point isn't to deny this or affirm this. It's look, you have a concept what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard.
Yeah.
You know, the place have no worries.
I've yeah, I've personally said that what's to even state that there will be such thing as gender in the akhirah. I've said that this is and because to me that the imagery of the Quran is mostly symbolic, but the I mean people can take it literally. I do that's also a view, but I feel that these things were just approximations. They were there to kind of because that's what the people, the audience, would it make sense of, as opposed to pure
You're
abstract
really,
things.
really taking on this trans agenda.
The, the what agenda? The trans.
Trans.
That's not what I was doing when I was saying, will there be gender? I wasn't trying to say that everybody would be referred to as they. I was trying to say that if we are us as consciousness, us.
So maybe another way of putting this is, does the ruh have
Exactly.
a
Agenda.
agenda?
In fact, when it's addressed in the Quran, fadkhuli,
It's them.
it's feminine. And
Yeah.
and that's my point of saying that we without our bodies, are we still not we? Like me, if I'm kind of like understanding everything through consciousness, does that still not exist without my body? And if people have had an out of body experience, they may be able to relate somewhat to things like this. And then in that case, what is gender and what is a body? Because a gender is restricted to the physicality of us.
But I think also we're talking about a body in the
Sorry, am
afterlife.
I still on shrooms right now?
I think even if people are talking about a body in the afterlife and they
Hmm.
say jasad, they conceptualize that in a way that doesn't resemble,
Hmm.
the word, as Ibn Abbas explained with these things, is they're words to give you a meaning
Exactly.
which is relative, so you can conceptualize it to some extent. It's not an exact description.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that is that there's the ishtirak, that which is just, these are simply, the signifier does not necessarily represent the signified. It's just the same signifier. So if I use the word tree here, it could be used by somebody else to refer to something else, but they're using the same word. That's all. So right, like as an example, let's say a family tree. Now you're using that word, the tree, or you could use it as in the tree of life, but it means something totally different there. It's just a symbolic overlap. Somebody said, um, right, Mufti is having a Descartes moment. I've had all of those moments long before, believe me. Um, right. Somebody had asked a question about Ibadah. I'm just trying to see where it went amidst all this chatter. Um, right. Oh, okay. Well, if I see, Zeba has asked, "Can I be a man in heaven?" Take it
I
up.
think you can be what you please, right?
Exactly. And what's interesting is some of the Hanafis, like Ibn Nujaym, addresses in a strange way this kind of a discussion. If people want to be, and but I mean, I suppose he touches into other aspects, touches quite rightly. But anyway, the point is, one of the outcomes is, yes, since Allah says وَفِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِ الْأَنفُسِ, whatever and once again Allah doesn't say the bodies, but he says the nafs, whatever the nafs, the self, the soul, the consciousness desires shall be. Uh, so based on that, one of the outcomes is, yeah, if a person wanted whatever, they would be whatever. Right. So, uh, please address my question, dear Mufti. How do you comment on Surah 3, verse 19, Surah 3, 80? People, I swear, people think like, people think you memorize these kind of numbers like, Surah 7, verse 17. You got, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, wait there, sorry, I was thinking 18. 17, okay, yeah, 17. Yeah.
Surah Al-Imran, verse 19. You've done history.
Say that Islam is the only faith with 2.62 and 3.113 that provides salvation for Ahlul Kitab and Sabians. So, okay, that is the discussion. We've already just had all of that discussion. You've missed it. We were speaking about salvation. Is it exclusive? Is it exclusive or inclusive? We've already had that.
Interestingly, just briefly, Ibn Taymiyyah cites that verse in the Musawwada to support his conclusion.
Being inclusive.
Inclusive.
Yeah, that's what I go with as well. That it's inclusive, not exclusive. Um, right. Okay. So, right. Mufti, do you believe in the shafa' of the Prophet ﷺ on the Day of Judgment? Okay. Shafa' of the Prophet ﷺ.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, unquestionably. But you see,
Maqam
to
al-Mahmud of the Quran.
me, the difference is only in the conceptualization. You see, many people may draw up an image in their minds. Oh, what does the shafa'ah mean? It means I'm standing here, the Prophet is standing here, I'm saying this, the Prophet is saying this, I'm picturing this. This visualization is all in your head. The reality is with Allah. Now that's what I'm saying, that the afterlife, we cannot, the Prophet said you can't even, anything you've imagined is wrong. That's what the Prophet said. That وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى بَالِ بَشَرٍ قَطْ. So anything مَا خَطَرَ عَلَى بَالِكَ فَهُوَ خَطَأ. And it's not from the afterlife. So that's my point, that what the kind of ontological reality of the akhirah, we just don't know that. But we're not meant to know that either. As somebody said, Mufti, can you make a mind trap with Shabir Yusuf? Shabir Yusuf? Who's Shabir Yusuf? Do you know? No? Okay. So sure, I mean, put me in touch and I'll have a... what is Ibn Hazm's Muhalla?
So Ibn Hazm was considered a Zahiri jurist, and what he did is he wrote a manual of fiqh called the Mujalla, which was a very terse kind of like bit of fiqh, and then he wrote an expansive commentary on that called the Muhalla. And the Muhalla lists and details from the positions of the Salaf to the Khalaf, the early scholars to the scholars of his age.
Yeah.
Almost any opinion that is transmitted.
I absolutely am a huge fan of Ibn Hazm. I love his reasoning in the Muhalla. Excellent.
His introduction has an introduction to do with Aqidah, a very kind of like rationalistic Aqidah. And then he has an introduction to do with Usul, how do we derive rules and laws in his madhab. And then he put a very short...
I'll just let it go live. All right, there it is. It's back. And we'll just... All right, people. I don't know what's going on today, people, but it's obviously some kind of a jinn that is attacking our live stream. So, you know what? Let's wrap this up. It's been incredible. It's been awesome. Really some profound insights have been shared. I'm really grateful, Shukran, Rashad, for taking the time out, for really bearing with us as well. These these vampire hours. Rashad, if people want to reach out to you, where can they find you? What's the best way? Tell us.
Easy online, Facebook and Twitter.
Facebook and Twitter. Okay, and that's Rashad Ali on Facebook.
Yeah.
Awesome. People, there you have it right there. The man, the myth, Rashad Ali. An absolute pleasure having you guys on tonight. And I do apologize for the brief interruptions we had. But then again, it's just consider it as a symbolic metaphor for life. With all right, and as always, make sure you do you do subscribe to my channel. Do click the notification icons. I'm going to bring it up just as we sign off. I am on Patreon. Do check it out. I do have a few exclusive things going on there. Some chats, a kind of monthly group session, and exclusive one-on-ones as well that are there. So do check that out. This Wednesday, coming Wednesday, I will have a live session not a live online session, but we will have a fiqh session in the flesh in Birmingham at the Ark. So you can do look out for that as well. That will be recorded and put on social media within the week as well. Guys, take very good care of yourselves. Rashad, once again, shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And to the people as well. Take very good care of yourselves. Assalamu alaikum.